What's up, party people, and welcome to Countdown to Classic. This is a podcast that educates, informs, and gossips about the highly anticipated World of Warcraft Classic. Each week we discuss the news, hot button issues, and content of the upcoming Classic servers. I'm your host, Josh Corbett, and this is a show where it's not my opinion on World of Warcraft that counts, but yours. If you're new to the show, Countdown to Classic goes through your expert input on everything relating to the upcoming release of World of Warcraft Classic. Now, just before we get started today, please just let me take a moment to give a huge shout out to you, the fans of Countdown to Classic. The show continues to go absolutely bananas download-wise, guys, and we've registered 70,000 unique downloads through April, which for a podcast is absolutely bonkers. And I couldn't be more amazed and humbled by everything that's been happening lately. But it's all thanks to you. More of you are reaching out to me via Twitter, Discord, and email to saying thanks and saying hello, and I've been getting back to everyone just saying thanks for the support. So here's another thank you to the community at large and the new listeners that are piling on every week. I actually had my first catch up with a fan in real life the other day, and a huge shout out to Oliver, a listener who I got kind of tipsy with last Friday night as we downed some beers over a few hours and talked Classic, and I couldn't have had a more brilliant representative of the fan base than Ollie, so thanks again to him. And on that note, the offer stands, people. If you happen to either live in or pass through Sydney, then yell out to me and I'll buy you a beer or two. I'd love to meet you if we can sort it out. Also, as I mentioned last week, everyone, due to the show's substantial growth, we are bringing on advertisers, hopefully sooner rather than later. And I still need more of you to go ahead and take 30 seconds out of your time to fill in that really short survey of about 5 easy questions about the demographics behind the show over at survey.libsyn.com/countdown to classic. Libsyn is spelled Libsyn. That address again is survey.libsyn.com/countdown to classic. And this time I'll try to remember to actually put the link in the show notes too. So please do consider taking the time out for the show there. That would be fantastic. And with all that housekeeping out of the way, today on Countdown, we've got progressive itemization news. We've got vanilla WoW class designer Kevin Jordan breaking down priests, and also we've been lucky enough to have Scott Hartsman stop by for an amazing chat. Scott is a very notable figure in the MMORPG landscape who has been involved in titles such as Everquest, Everquest 2 and Rift, and we discussed the nature of competing with WoW back in the day, some behind the scenes production chat about Everquest, Everquest 2 and Rift, and also a great back and forth on the present and future of MMORPG gaming. So please do make sure that you listen to all of that one. It was a really fun discussion and Scott was fantastic. Take note that during these calls today, you'll hear babies crying, dogs barking, cats meowing. So please do afford us a little bit of auditory slack there. We're all grown-ups now with things going on in the background, so your patience is, as always, very much so appreciated. You all know the drill by now. This is a community-based podcast, so if you like what you're hearing, join the Discord now and keep the conversations going with us all over there. Follow me on Twitter at Counts2Classic with the number 2, or email me at feedback@countdowntoclassic.com if you'd like to call into the show, make a suggestion, or just say hi. Everything you'll need is in the show notes for each episode, along with the show's Patreon link. If you'd really like to help keep the show going, or if subscriptions aren't your thing, then you can always check out the show's Ko-Fi link, the tip jar over there at Ko-Fi. And there's also the show's merch store with some great designs over there for t-shirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, things of that nature. And finally, just a reminder, we are guild recruiting over at Countdown to Classic, so head on over to the show's Discord to get more information on our plans for Classic. But with all that said, let's fire up a call that happens to feature return caller Nano of Nostalrius. And I just want to throw out a big plug for Nano's Twitter. Please do go and throw him a follow at Nano_Warcraft. He's fantastic on this call and great over at Twitter with his WoW Classic thoughts, so check him out. But let's start the show with Calling Countdown. All right, it's time for another Countdown to Classic emergency call, and we've got 3 great listeners on the line and one returner who I've been dying to talk to for a long time. Nano, on the road, going the extra mile for Countdown to Classic. How are you, man?
I'm good. I'm driving home from work on a Friday afternoon with some classic news in my head.
It's fantastic. And joining us, we've got Ante. How are you, man?
Good to see you again, mate.
Thanks.
Nice and early in the morning.
Thanks for being here, mate. It is for us. And Fredmunroe, as always, hello.
Hi, how you doing?
Good to have you back, man. Now look, Nano, let's start with you. You are driving along with this classic news flowing through your head. We have got this big news a few hours ago regarding progressive itemization in the game. This confirms something that a lot of us were sort of starting to think, going, oh yeah, I really don't think they're going to be doing progressive itemization. And Blizzard has come out via a blue post and straight up said, nope, everything's going to be 1.12 version. So tell me your thoughts initially on that, Nano.
Yeah, this is how I kind of guessed how it would end up going. I've said it a few times along the way, but this is the cleanest version of the way that they could do itemization. They know they have the final stat patches with the reference client that they're using, reference database that they're using, and for them to go back and dig exactly when the stats were supposed to be during certain phases. It's just a huge workload that I never thought really that they would decide to take. Plus, there's a lot of confusion on the player base, and they have to push out, database updates to everybody and client updates so they can see the proper stats along the way. It just seems like that it wasn't something that they wanted to enter into from a development and design perspective. So, I'm happy that they're not including the later items that were added to the game into the earlier portions of the game. So items like Spellweaver's Turban from UBRS or Diana's Pearl from Livestrat, which are significantly good caster items, won't be available until, AQ time. So I think that's a really good thing. I had a little Twitter post where talking about like some MC items, and there's some question marks there, but that was just kind of my initial impression.
Yeah, well, I definitely want to get back to that Twitter post. Well, I'll just circle around and talk to the other guys and remind me, Nano, I definitely want to come back to that interaction you had with Ian Hazakostas via Twitter. Now, Fred, just to round off on initial reactions here, is there any kind of negatives for you, any lamenting for previous versions of items? Like, damn, I won't get that 1.5 version of that item that I really wanted to see. Do you think it's all positives and whatnot, or are you a little bit brokenhearted?
Well, I'm a bit sad about it. I think in general there are a few items which are big trouble items, like for example, Savage Gladiator Chain, which was changed in 1.11. So for those of you using like the Blizzard timeline, that would be phase 6. So phase 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if we're actually being progressive itemization, this is going to be this is going to be BIS game for like a Fury Warrior until AQ. And this is a dungeon drop that's really easily farmable from BRD Arena. So that's going to be a bit of an issue. And they also have items like Bone Reaver's Edge, which in their final state are significantly more powerful than they are in their beginning state. And then just in general, I guess this sort of reminds me of like the DM stuff, which is that you can get a lot of benefit from farming. You can get a lot of benefit from farming different dungeons for gear if you don't have this sort of final state. So just to give you an example, in Nostalrius, you'd have 3 sets of gear early on a hunter, right? Your BIS game gear prior to DM would be 3 pieces of tier 1 and then a bunch of random dungeon blues. Then your gear would change a whole bunch when DM came out, because at that point you'd have a bunch of DM gear along with some of the other dungeon gear and 3 pieces of tier 1. And then finally, when you have the final state 1.12 tier 1, then your BIS gear is full 8 out of 8 T1, right? So you're not going to have that anymore. Instead of having like all this content by having 3 different sets of gear that you have to farm and use, now when the game starts out, you're going to only have 1 set of gear. So I sort of am a little bummed about it.
Okay, Ante, we'll turn around to you. And guys, obviously, as you know, jump in whenever you want. If someone says something that makes you want to comment, don't wait for me to sort of direct a question to you. Jump in whenever.
I actually kind of wanted to say something to Fred just then. I think there's going to be a bunch of 30-year-old kind of guys who have got families and lives who were 18 years old back in the day who had no life, who would be very happy about not having to farm stupid amounts of time just to get best in slot items.
Yeah, I've already gotten a message from a listener who wanted to be a part of this call but couldn't, who said, Josh, this is actually a really big win for the casuals. And that was listener Vestberg, who said, now we can make a best in slot list without having to worry about items changing throughout the game. We can just update it when a new phase drops. So it does alleviate a little bit of farming and sort of, just general listing concerns for some of the casuals. Would you agree with that, Ante?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like, as much as I don't have kids and stuff like that.
That you know of, you mean?
Well, that I, well, freaking out now.
Yeah, go Nano.
Yeah, so I think that the idea here is you're still going to have two lists, right? You're going to have your pre-raid best in slot items, and then you're going to have your full best in slot items for the specific phase that you're in. And what's really changed here is that full best in slot has now shifted its weight more heavily towards raid gear. So I'm not actually sure that it actually benefits the casual player as much, because the better items are becoming from raids, which presumably will have, just a higher barrier of entry for more players. So you're still going to be farming your pre-raid best in slot items before DM comes out, and when DM comes out, to supplement the spots that you have not received yet from your raid. But ultimately, you're looking to replace those blues with raid items for a number of classes, right? So hunters, rogues, warriors, those kind of places. You're going to be using a lot more tier 1 with this system than you would otherwise, which I think is a good thing.
Now, Nano, if I can just keep you going. Now, guys, if you've got any response to that, just hang on to it for 1 second, because I just want to get this out of Nano as well. We alluded to that the Twitter interaction that you had with Ian Hazakostas. You threw him out a tag, and he doesn't pipe up too often on Twitter, but it was great to see he got back to you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so specifically in the post, they referenced 1.10 items, right? So we talked about that a little bit, and I mentioned a few, like being added into the game. Those won't be available early, but the updated items like Savage Gladiator or Banthox Smash from BRD Arena, those will be the final stat versions. And I kind of wanted to hear, okay, well, there was other times of the game too that added to dungeons and raids. So 1.4, they added a number of dungeon items and items into MC and Anixia's loot table, and also 1.4 is onto MC and world bosses, Kazakh and Nazargos. So I wanted to hear from Ian the clarifications, like what's their plan with those items? Do they intended them to go in which phase? And his response was that their thinking is that phase 2 is patch 1.3 and 1.4, which would back in the day mean Dire Maul release and Honor System release. And so those would add items like Domo's chest to the game with the Ancient Petrified Leaf and the Eye of Divinity and the Anixia's head and a number of items to those. And then 1.5 would be pushed with the BWL patch, and that would be the release of like Battlegrounds and BWL 1.5, 1.6. But that set of items in Molten Core, stuff like Onslaught Girdle or Mana Igniting Cord or Robo Volatile Power, and then those would be held based on what Ian said in the Twitter post, those would be held until they were released concurrently with BWL. And so I have some concerns about that, because those are MC items that are iconically MC items that wouldn't be available until BWL came out, which seems odd or even potentially an oversight on their part. So hopefully they'll give more clarification to that. It's being amplified on Twitter a decent bit by some of the other content creators. So hopefully they're able to clarify that a little bit more, and potentially that we're helping shift the direction on that, because I think it'll be better for those items to be available earlier.
Fred, I'll turn to you. We just heard a lot from Nano. Do you have anything to sort of extrapolate on that? And I'll just add in as well. I'd be interested to hear. I'm presuming that there was no real shock from anyone when Ian Hazakostas spelled out on Twitter that, like, as Nano just said, hey guys, generally phase 2 is thought to be 1.3 to 1.4, phase 3 is 1.5 to 1.6, and phase 4 is 1.7 to 1.8, etc., etc. I'm presuming that didn't sort of make anyone go like, whoa, like that's pretty much what we were saying beforehand, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not super surprised about that. I'll say that, again, I'm going to agree with Nano about this one. Shouldn't come as a surprise when I played on Nostalrius. I played on Elysium. I like the private server the way they I really do think that it was a good way of sort of getting milking most of the content. Although I am cognizant of that response that, well, maybe you do want to make it easier for people who don't have that much time to do stuff. But I mean, if that's the case, then why not have Dire Maul available in phase 1? I mean, I thought like we were sort of agreeing that actually this is sort of a valuable thing to allow people to sort of get to experience and this sort of grind and putting people ahead who put in the effort earlier on.
All right. Ante, I just want to throw one thing at you. Now, you might have a bunch of things to say from what Nano just said, but again, like I'm not shocked by any of this, and a number of the blue posts lately haven't really shocked me. Now, we've said on the show recently, Fred might have even been on this call a few weeks ago, where we've been starting to say that, well, I've been starting to say that I don't think Blizzard actually has this old data. You know, we got the presentation at BlizzCon. They showed us, you know, maybe it's a bit murky beyond 1.9 or what have you. And now it's starting to feel to me like they've only got 1.12 and that's it. And so this whole sort of, this really, really long blue post explaining the fact that we're not getting progressive itemization to me has been like the world's greatest, the world's longest and most convoluted wording for my dog ate patch 1.5. What do you think about that?
Oh, you're alluding back to drunk Ante with the tinfoil hat moment, aren't you?
I am.
Oh, look, they're doing 1.12 items and stuff like that. They're doing it the easiest way possible. They could do progressive itemization and stuff like that. They could. The data is all there. It could be mined, it could be found and all that kind of stuff. And some of the proc rates for bits and items, they could reinvent those, you know. It's not really reinventing the wheel. They could work it. They could possibly have it. They're looking at doing it the most budget-worthy way possible. And a lot of work would go into progressive itemization. Blizzard is a company. Activision is a bigger company that owns them, and they want to obviously make the most amount of profit from this, and the more time that goes in development is the more cost that it actually does to do it, to actually make it. And if it doesn't make money at the end of the day, Activision will not be happy. The shareholders will not be happy. So they could be just taking the easiest route. I'm not saying that they are, but they could.
Chiming in for the people here who always seem to want the correction in there where it's like Activision doesn't own them, it's a merger, just to remind you, Ante. Yeah, I always get that one. Now circling back rounds, Nano. I had a funny thought the other day, and again, you guys know I'm allowed one stupid question every call. When we talk about whether or not, and Ante, you may have sort of lightly alluded to it there or on the call that we took about a week ago that we scrapped, but when we talk about them not having the data and, they're only bound by what they've got, but they know what the item stats were. I'm sure that information is out there, as Ante's just said. So why can't they simply just plug in what the item stats were and update them over the time, as opposed to, like, I know they've spelled out this philosophy behind it, going, we're not doing that because of a design process ideal that we have. But if they wanted to, I presume they could, right? Even if they didn't have the old patches.
I mean, so we were able to do, to a large degree, like the backporting of item stats to previous patches. And so we had far less resources than Blizzard does in order to do that. They could easily develop a tool to write directly into the database what item stats should be, and it would take one person a day to update a lot of it. So, but to go what Ante was saying there is that there's kind of a subtext to the idea that the easiest way is not necessarily the best way or the wrong way to do it. And I don't know if I agree with that. I think when we talk about the easiest way, it may take less development time, but it's also easier for the normal average player to understand what's going on in the game when things don't change all that often. So if item stats and like, well, you know, in patch 1.2, this item is your best, and then 1.3, this item is your best, and then patch 1.4, you'll go back to that first item again, and then that's your best. Those kind of things are really confusing and convoluted, and there's just no really clean way of making everything work correctly by backporting items and stats and spells and talents, because you go down this whole big rabbit hole. And so the cleanest way for both the development side and for the understanding of the average player is to do as they've presented right now. You're adding, everybody gets you know, new patches come out, items come out along with it. That's a normal part of the MMO process that people understand. But people don't necessarily understand, like, I have this item and all of a sudden it turns different, and that's weird. Or turn different like 6 different times. That's weird. So, my thought process on it is like, a clean version is a good version both for players and for development.
Oh, Nano, I totally agree with you there. I am heavily in the camp that I actually love this kind of announcement that they're just keeping with it and stuff like that. And if they really did progressive itemization, you'd be pleasing this tiny little crowd who's got their hands up in arms. But I bet you they'd be the same crowd that have their hands up in arms if you put Cthulhu back to the original way where you couldn't kill it.
So the question I have for you, Ante, is what's your opinion on them releasing new items when the patches come out? Because I have a lot of experience in Nostalrius and Elysium with people being very, very upset that they couldn't get, for example, their clever hat from Strat Undead. It was sort of a meme that, like, for the first 2 or 3 months on both those servers, you could actually get, like, mages and casters to come and join you in Strat because they thought all these items which were later added in 1.10 were actually in the game because they're using these databases to look them up. So when you actually gate items, you have the same problem where there's, like, huge amounts of players really confused trying to farm for these items that, like, seem to never drop. Oh, I'm so unlucky. This item with 50% drop rate hasn't dropped for 100 runs. Turns out it's actually not even in the game. So, like, are you actually even a fan of, like, forget about progressive itemization, of just, like, progressive gated item release like they're doing at all, or would you prefer they didn't even do that at all?
I'm okay with that. I mean, I played vanilla. I was used to those items going all over the place and changing and appearing with new items and all those kind of things. I think that people will not be able to look back on the vanilla databases and be able to kind of go, oh, I should expect this item drop, I should expect this item then and stuff like that. New databases are going to have to be created, and anyone looking back at those ones is going to have to be very clear that, you know, you're not getting what you're looking at.
Yes, some of it, so like Undead Strat is a really good example to have a conversation about because of the quality of items that were added in that 1.4 patch. So that would equal to phase 2 for us. So, like, when that phase 2 hits on Classic, you'll be getting 3 brand new dungeons in Dire Maul. You'll be getting world bosses, and I believe, and then you'll be getting now this item update to some other dungeons. And so you're right, like, before they start adding, like, the healer items and the caster items to Undead Strat, it's always, like, one tank, looking for, like, one tank and like, one healer and one caster for Undead Strat, because the hunters and the rogues and the warriors don't want to share their, lower their chance to get the Cape of the Black Baron, right? But no casters want to go because they get nothing from it. But then 1.4 hits, and all of a sudden, every healer wants to go to Undead Strat, and every caster wants, you know, the chance to get their hat from the Magistrate. And so that's kind of interesting and cool to me that, you know, one day casters don't care about this, and the other day they're like, actually, I really need to go because I need to pick up XYZ. And so it breathes new life into dungeons as you add items to it. And I get the idea, like, maybe it is a little bit more confusing, but I think that process is pretty normal for an MMO, that now all of a sudden, like, hey, I have a reason to go do this thing that I didn't previously care about, and I think that's cool.
But my point is that, like, you could make, like, pretty much the exact same argument for changing the item stats as well, progressive itemization. Like, I totally agree with you. I think that's why it's great to have gated items. And I think that's also why it's great to have progressive itemization.
Yeah, that goes back to, like, I'm in favor of progressive itemization to its strictest sense, as we did on Nostalrius. But I'm just expressing why I understand why they're not making that decision from a development and design perspective, and from the average player's perspective as well.
I'm with you.
Do you guys think that you look at the game from a view that you would call almost too hard?
Too hardcore?
Yeah. I'll put it like this. Okay, so there is SM Armory had nothing that any caster would ever want to drop, and you'd had every single warrior and every single shaman looking to grind that place as soon as they hit level 38 because they wanted the items in there. I ran that one as a mage countless amount of times because I like playing in a group. I'm a casual player. I don't like leveling. I like grinding in dungeons because I like the kind of community thing. So I'm like, you know, if Stratholm doesn't have anything for my mage in phase 1, I'm still going to go along. Because I like playing, you know, I'm a casual player. I like just doing dungeons and stuff like that. Why not?
Yeah, so going back to your previous example of, like, people who were in their teens when they played vanilla who are now 30 plus and married and have kids, that's me. But I still want to succeed at the highest levels of the game as possible, but my time is crunched, right? So I don't have 8 hours every day where I can just sit and, like, focus on things that, you know, are fun to do. I don't level fishing because it just takes too long, and I have a limited amount of time resource to spend on the game. So I'm I oftentimes try to min-max the time that I spent on the game. So if I don't get any tangible benefit from Undead Strat and there wasn't some overwhelming reason why I needed to go, like a guild member just needed to fill a spot and I was available. But when I'm spending my time on the game, I want to maximize that time. So whether it's farming gold or getting better items or running the dungeons that I need to run, that's kind of how I operate right now, because I have to in order to be the best player I can be with the time that I have.
Fred,
makes sense.
Fred, if I can turn to you for a second, mate. Now, you're like me. You're a gun for hire. We do what we do professionally. Now, if I was to ask you or hire you to argue the other side of the coin here, because I'm sure there are some people who are pretty unhappy about this and they'll want someone to go into bat for them. I'm just getting a message from a listener, Phantom's Power, who was in on the show recently when we broke down the PvP update, I believe. And he's saying that, he's not really happy with Blizzard's reasoning here. And some of it sounds alright, but, it's nothing new that we didn't know already. They didn't even specifically address the PvP weapon issue. So, just sort of building on that, if you were to forge an argument for the people who couldn't see anything positive out of this, what would you say?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is sort of my stance already. I mean, this is how I open talking about how when you have progressive monetization, you get to really milk the dungeons for their full value. Again, like the example is Bis game Hunter, as it was on Nostalrius, you get to go with your pre-bis blues from a bunch of dungeons plus 3 pieces of tier 1. Oh, and then Dharmal comes out, and now like my entire gear changes, and that's like cool gameplay, and that's gameplay I get to do while I farm my new gear. And then AV comes out, and there's new items in MC that drop them. That's the 1.5 stuff, which seems like to be pushed to patch 2 here, to phase 2 rather. And so just within that first like pre-BWL phase, that's like 3 different sets of armor that you get to wear, that you get to farm, that gives you gameplay. And that gameplay is all erased when you, just use no progressive monetization at all. So I think there's like a huge loss of content that comes when you don't do progressive monetization. And I mean, that's the same reason why you have Dire Maul delayed. Like, presumably Blizzard recognized that there's a value to having, some of this item and content gated, because it gives you a reason to farm the previous dungeons, and because it gives you like this feeling of progression because, oh cool, now I'm getting stronger, right? And you just lose all of that when you don't have progressive monetization.
All right. Nano, I'll just ask you, mate, you mentioned a number of items, things like Bone Reaver's Edge and whatnot at the start of the call. Outside of the things that we've talked about already, are there any items that you can think of off the top of your head that really did benefit the most from progressive itemization that now, well, I guess what I'm saying is, what are the items that the 1.12 version of, could be, deemed slightly, I don't know, not OP, but, a very, very strong version of that item that people could come to look forward to?
Yeah, we mentioned a few of them already. So the biggest one that jumps out to me is the Savage Gladiator chest from the BRD arena, because it's really accessible. It's a lower level 50 area, easily farmed, easily accessed. And it's a very, very good item for melee DPS, to the point where it doesn't get replaced until multiple phases. So that one jumps out to me, as a very especially good, item that got updated in 1.10. And Bone Reaver's Edge is another one. The last version of it was really good, and to have the access for it, like really early, because it's a bonus drop off of Ragnaros. So a lot of people are going to have access to potentially getting that if they're raiding. But one cool thing about that is that's going to be like classic, like Bone Reaver's Edge is going to be really good. And if the drop rate is appropriate and not that common, then you're going to see people and you're going to fear that Bone Reaver's Edge. And that's kind of a cool thing, even though they're going to be carrying that one for a long time. But it also changes up when now Two-Hander Fury is like really good, where on private servers, everybody is dual wielding. So it's a little different than what, a lot of the private server veterans are used to. But again, the number one that jumps out to me is Savage Gladiator chest, because it is so easy to farm.
All right. Ante, wrapping up, anything that you can think of to say before we end the call?
Do you guys really think that really makes that much difference? I genuinely wonder if you guys genuinely think that having, for instance, that chest piece drop and having it best in slot for 2-3 phases or whatever it is really changes the balance of the game. I mean, like, we're talking about guilds who are pretty much trivializing Molten Core and saying we'll clear it within the first week of the game being out. All right, so Molten Core's trivialized. Blackwing Lair, again, it's been on multiple servers and stuff like that. People have got all the strats down. I'd venture to say within phase 2 of being, whatever Blackwing Lair comes out, within, let's say, a week, maybe 2, the whole thing will be cleared as well. Encourage 40 is really the first test. That's where things start getting real serious, where it goes from like a casual guild to a hardcore guild.
Yeah.
Or I look at it like that and I just kind of go, well, if we make that stuff accessible for the more casual player and those items actually do make it so they get a chance to go into Molten Core, they get a chance to do Blackwing Lair, it's going to put them in a good position where maybe if they've got the time to devote that they could potentially go and do something that they didn't do. And that's kind of comes from a person who was in that position. I never did AQ40. I certainly never did anything higher than that.
I definitely hear that, and I think, it's definitely true that it's not going to matter to the pros. They're just going to, destroy MC the day it's released, destroy W all the week. I'm just saying, like, there are certain items which I think really are just egregious. I mean, we've talked about it a lot, but the Savage Glad Chain, I mean, that can be farmed with 2 people, like in a BRD arena, which you can access after 2 mobs, and you can get that in like under, and that is going to be the chess piece that all Fury Warriors wear until AQ is released, right? So it's not 2-3 phases. It's from phase 1. You're going to wear it phase 1, and you're not going to change until phase 5. I mean, like that's just egregious in my opinion. Like it's not really, it sort of ruins what makes an MMO good when you don't have this progression because, for the first year of the game release, you're never going to change your chess piece outs. Like what's cool about that?
Yeah. So I think that one especially is the outlier, cause there's nothing else quite that level that you get from dungeons that you wouldn't replace in MC or BWL with some item, that I can think of off the top of my head. But to answer the larger question is, do I think it matters? Not really in terms of people's ability to clear the content. So it matters in their feeling of like progression and that stuff for certain pieces, for certain classes. But I don't think that there's anybody that would have required this version of itemization to kill bosses that they wouldn't have otherwise, right? So like, I don't think that there's any guild out there that would break up before they killed Ragnaros because they didn't have this version of itemization. So in terms of how much does it truly matter from a macro level, I don't think it matters all that much. But on the varying degrees for individuals, play styles and what they're hoping to get out of the game, it can matter to them a great deal. And we shouldn't discount that. But just on a macro level, I don't think it makes that big of a difference in people's ability to clear content.
All right, guys, we might wind it up there, and let me just thank all of you again. Nano, I know you were out and about, and you still answered the call. I can't thank you enough, mate. It's been too long. We'll have to get you back again sometime. It's so good to talk to you again.
Yeah, I'm delaying seeing my wife. I'm driving circles around my neighborhood, so it's time to go.
The classic community appreciates it. Thanks, mate. We'll let you go. And Fredmunroe, thanks as always.
Thanks, Ed, for having me.
And Ante, mate, always a pleasure.
Cheers, bud.
We'll talk to you guys later. See you guys. Recently, on my other podcast, The Cinephiles, and this quick preview will be 100% spoiler-free, everyone, so don't freak out. We covered 2019's Avengers Endgame.
Liam, what do you think? As the sort of the doubter of the Marvel
Well, I'd
family.
like to respond to that question with a quote from a good movie.
Oh.
Just when I think Marvel can't get any stupider, they go and do something like this and completely redeem themselves.
Ah, very good.
I loved it.
Okay.
You will never hear me say that about a Marvel film apart from this.
If you'd like to hear more from the Cinephiles, then please do log on to cinephiles.com. That's SINNERFILES. Or search for the Cinephiles on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. But now, let's get back to Countdown. Hey everyone, I'm about to fire up the call with Scott Hartsman, but I just want to take a quick moment to profusely thank Scott again for taking time out of his day for this chat. He didn't know me from a bar of soap, but was so open and gracious from the get-go when I reached out to him. Scott was a big get for the show, and I would love to think that as the show continues to grow, it can bring you even more industry figures like Scott, who had such fantastic takes not only on vanilla World of Warcraft, but also on the MMORPG landscape and gaming industry in general. So thanks, Scott, from the bottom of my heart. Let's hear what he had to say. All right, it's time for another countdown to Classic Call, and a very special call today with a very special guest. I'm so delighted to be joined by an MMO veteran, I'm going to come out and say it, somewhat of a legend in the industry, Scott Hartsman. Thank you so much for joining us here at Countdown to Classic.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's an absolute delight to have you here, mate, and we've got a lot of questions for you. And, you know, if any of you are wondering already straight off the bat, Scott was heavily involved with Everquest, Everquest 2, other games like Rift. We're going to get into all of that as we go through this chat. But joining us, given that it is going to be slightly, you know, obviously a bit of an Everquest chat, and we'll meld that into how it worked with WoW. I've got a bunch of questions to make it relevant to the show. Don't worry, everyone. I've been joined by, you've heard him on the show before. He's a huge diehard Everquest fan. Gnoran, how are you, mate?
Hey, Josh. I'm great. Thanks for having me back.
It's my absolute pleasure, mate. Now, Scott, we'll start off by obviously a little bit of an introduction. Now, I mentioned to you off call that I was trying to do my best at sleuthing about your former titles. I've gone through your LinkedIn profile as well, and whether you want to mention from the very beginning as well, I saw like a shout out to the mid 80s and Interplay. Tell us if that's true or not, but tell us what you've done over the years.
Yeah, I actually got started back when online games were just MUDs and modems in that era, and so I got my first job. I was a writer and scripter. That was back when writers were scripters, were game masters, were customer service people, were itemizing. It was like either you were a programmer or you did everything else. So I was one of the everything else back in that era. And then, you know, over the years have launched or worked on 20 or 30 different online game titles, and probably about 20 or 30 expansions as well. But yeah, the biggest names in all of that, obviously, EverQuest was big, EverQuest 2 was big, Rift was big, Trove was big, some winners in there.
Okay, sorry, mate. My cat just went off in the background as it draws my attention. So, you mentioned obviously, you know, some of the bigger titles you've been involved with, EverQuest, EverQuest 2. Let's start with EverQuest. What was your actual role there?
Sure. I was technical director there was my title. Back in those days though, everybody, you know, we were doing so much work with such small teams. People, you know, stepped way outside the boundaries all the time. And so, you know, we didn't really have the position of live producer back then. And so there were probably a half dozen of us that split the duties for that. You know, I was also very, very heavily involved with a lot of the gameplay systems and gameplay programming that was done, because so much of that got done by myself and other programmers on the weekends. So yeah, the title was technical director, but my love was really EverQuest gameplay.
Okay. And then obviously as years went by, you did get tied up in EverQuest 2. How did you roll with that game? I think it changed a little bit, did it?
Yeah. So I was the technical director on that one, ahead of the launch, and, myself, the lead content designer from EverQuest, and the design director from EverQuest, kind of a funny story. We all got called down into the studio head's office, one Monday morning, and he went, "Well, guys, I got a surprise for you. Now, we're, you know, the three guys in charge of EverQuest, just happy, you know, love our jobs. We're getting worked to death, but we still loved it anyway." And we got informed, "Hey, guess what? You're going to go work on EQ2 starting today. Good luck." And, so we ended up taking new titles over on the EverQuest 2 team. I eventually became the senior producer over there.
Obviously, after your time with EverQuest 2, a lot of people will also be quite familiar with you because you ventured out on your own somewhat, didn't you, with your work with, now I'm going to say it wrong. I'm sure there's two schools of saying it. Is it Trion or Trion?
Honestly, it depends on which country you're from. So it is to actually Trion, but we do get a lot of Trion from outside the US, and that's all right.
And one of the, obviously, that company pushed out Rift, which a lot of people are very familiar with. You worked hard on that game. You were the CEO over there at Trion. That must have been a pretty bold move going out on your own in a way.
It was kind of crazy. So, in the interim between Sony and Trion, I, moved up to the Bay Area, to do the classic Silicon Valley startup, in the era of Facebook and social gaming. And I did a social games startup, where I was one of the co-founders for about a year and realized that I can't stand social games and needed to get the hell out of them. Cause honestly, at least for me as a game maker, if I'm not making the kinds of games that I want to play as a player, it doesn't really seem like it's a great way to invest your time. Right. And so then I wasn't one of the founders at Trion. I joined up with that group about, I want to say, maybe 15 months before Rift launched. And we had to do a big turnaround of that game. And I'd say the vast majority of the game that people played during Rift's launch was, at least the content and the lore and so on, was assembled in the final 18 months, which is I don't know if you've been keeping an eye on the conversations on Twitter, but that's been a kind of a recurring theme for online service-based games lately.
Well, I definitely do want to gather your thoughts on the industry at the moment a little bit later down the track. But thanks so much for that sort of introduction to who you are and what makes you tick. And now I'm sure everyone knows a lot more about you and understands why you're here on this call and why it's such a special call. But let's rip it all the way back to, I guess we should start focusing on those EverQuest days. Now, you talked about your background where you started out when, games were still muds and, I was looking at some of the titles that, things like Interplay used to do, like, the Bard's Tale and, even titles that made me smile, like Battle Chess from back in the day. But, you had that background and then you get involved with EverQuest. And I sort of wanted to start with when you were there dealing with that team. What was it like? Because obviously EverQuest went on to become what it did. What was it like sort of with those ambitions for being, the first big thing of MMORPGs?
There were so many things invented on that team, at that studio, at that time that went on to become industry standards. It's just, I can't even recount them all. And you've definitely seen it as as people have cross-pollinated across different dev studios, including Blizzard, right? And, it was it was fun and nerve-wracking and exciting and painful. And basically pick an emotion. Every single one of them happened very, very intensely every single week, right? You would see, we'd be working incredibly, incredibly too many hours, but we were doing it out of love for the game and love for the players. This was the kind of game that we all wanted to be playing. So we poured everything we had into making it, maintaining it, and updating it.
There was an article that came out in PC Gamer last month about EverQuest. Mm-hmm. Rosie Rappaport was talking about how there was just a ton of overtime and everyone's kind of sleeping under desks, going home after 2:00 and later. Were you among that kind of crowd? Being in the office just super late, just working diligently on the.
Yeah. There wasn't anybody on the team that was immune to that, honestly. We would have people in at 10 in the morning, and very frequently, especially on EverQuest 1, out at 1 or 2 a.m. And that was something that, tended to persist. Definitely the pre-launch team had it like that for longer than anybody else. But then the post-launch team, every time an expansion started getting, close to the, call it from the mid-cycle through the launch, it was that level of intensity the entire way through.
Now, whilst you guys were putting together EverQuest, I'm sure you were also quite involved. Well, not, even though it wasn't your role, I'm sure you were speaking to the guys and, heard the chatter and were relatively involved as well in some of the design choices that would be made as the game was being built.
Oh yeah, of course. It was like I said, everybody, the entire, design leadership team was 3 people, right? And the engineering leadership team was essentially me. So it was, we basically had this council of people that were making decisions. And yeah.
Well, I've interviewed a number of the former developers of World of Warcraft from back in the vanilla days on the show, and they've talked about some of the internal discussions or, flat out arguments that they would have about what should and should not go in the game. And obviously they took a lot of inspiration, if you call it inspiration, from EverQuest. But I'd love to know, what were the kind of things that you guys, may have deemed controversial, that you argued about internally, about what was going to go in, what was going to stay out? What was the hardest part in terms of large design decisions for you guys?
Yeah, there were constant debates. So the way that game changes were originally made, there was a list that we had internally called EQ Tune, where all tuning discussions were to occur. And it was kind of like, one person would propose something to the mailing list, and then a flame war would ensue, and then somebody would make a decision. And a lot of the decisions and discussions were very thematically around the idea of, today we would call it accessibility versus not. But back then it was, how, EverQuest at the time was very much a hardcore, it was the hardcore MMO, right? You could lose your corpse, you could lose levels, you could lose XP, there was all of this risk of loss and all of this competition for scarce resources, which in EverQuest's case were generally, named spawns and time spawns. And so there was in general, there was this competition for the right to even play the game. And so we would have discussions about how much of that core feel and that core EverQuestness do we need or want to retain. And, there were very, very heated discussions among, different groups of people on the team where, the hardcore would say, no, death penalties need to be in. Death penalties need to be as hard as they are right now. And I'll freely admit, at the time, I was one of those people. And then meanwhile, on the other side, you'd have people arguing for, no, we need, no real death penalty. Why don't we just move them somewhere else in the world and make the walk back the penalty? And, a lot of us hardcore people would say, oh, no, that, you couldn't really do that. That would be ridiculous. And meanwhile, of course, look what happened in future games. Exactly that.
Gnoran, do you have anything that flows on from that?
I guess just in terms of the tuning process before releasing the game. I mean, when you're in EverQuest and you're really playing it in depth, you get a sense that it's almost a real world in itself. I'm just looking at like a list of factions from classic EverQuest up through Velius, and there's 249 factions.
Yep.
Now it's like super in depth, and from people that may be listening that aren't familiar with EverQuest, you can increase and decrease almost all of those factions so that you can be welcome or you can be, considered a villain even in your own home city. How much of that was talked about going in? Is it like we want people to make these decisions? Is it sort of like that D&D atmosphere, or was it kind of something that kind of popped up later?
No, you nailed it. It very much was the, how close to a D&D-like real world can we make this? It's funny because you'll hear people talk about depending on their own experience with the game and what time they played the game, you'll hear people talk about EverQuest either as a sandbox or a theme park. And you'll hear both, you'll hear good arguments on both sides. Because originally it was supposed to be exactly like you described, this is a living world where your actions have impact, and people will remember who you are and what you've done and will treat you accordingly. Sometimes that will be a super great result. Other times that will be a painful result, but it's a result of you living and taking actions in a world.
I guess like a brief touch on the PvP aspect, because you were talking about losing corpses and losing experience and everything like that. The way that, I guess this is sort of tying it in with Warcraft a little bit. Warcraft's PvP was less punishing on the players, whereas EverQuest, you could loot one item off somebody if it wasn't, I think it was their chest piece or their weapon. How was that something that you all kind of agreed was something, the game is punishing as it is, but if you're going to PvP against one another, there's a little bit more of an added risk to it, or, I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, so as you'll recall, back in those days, EverQuest had originally started with a PvP server, and then it's, expanded to another PvP server and another PvP server. In the code, a lot of those, those different servers had different miniature tweaks to their rule set to accommodate exactly the kinds of discussions that you're asking about. So, for instance, one of the hardest core servers, if one of the ways that discussion would have resolved on the team and did resolve on the team at the time is, hey, we want to introduce a new, more punitive type of PvP, gameplay, at which case, discussion ensued. And the result was, you know what? We're just going to launch this new gameplay on a brand new, PvP type server. And it's going to be the harder core of the PvP type servers. And it did have an audience, and it did grow, and it did, grow for a while, and it did do pretty well. But yeah, generally anything that's going to be too demanding or too much of like changing the rules on people midstream ended up on its own server, which is how we ended up with multiple servers.
Scott, I'll ask, you put so many years into working on this title, and eventually it ships and it gets the reception that it does. Were you guys somewhat surprised that it captured the hearts and minds of players or MMORPG players in the way that it did and became this sort of, progenitor of this cultural phenomenon? Or were you kind of expecting it because you realized the game was good?
So I think, so the team that was doing the launch they very clearly knew, and, John Smedley gets a ton of credit for, going to the original dev leads and saying, guys, I know you guys want to make a 2D game like Ultima, but here I think we need to make a 3D game. Now go make it happen. And then they went back and went, holy shit, how do we even begin to do this? And I think everybody understood that at that point, if they were able to pull it off, it was going to be unlike anything that had ever happened and was definitely going to push the genre forward. That really wasn't in doubt. What was in doubt was, can they actually pull it off? Because the tech at the time, there was no just go out and buy a game engine. There was no just go out and rent servers. There's so many things that we take for granted today just did not exist back then. And meanwhile, they were building it with a team of approximately 40 people.
I'll weave it a bit more into, and I'm more than happy, Ganoran, to come back to specific EQ stuff, so I don't feel like you've missed your opportunity by any means. But I want to cut to a moment where, years pass, EverQuest is the smash hit success that it is, Scott, and then you start to hear rumblings of this other game being developed. And I'm sure you'd probably heard a few rumors of multiple titles coming for your crown. But if I can just get you to talk about that moment in time, whether it's a year or two after launch, and starting to hear what the rest of the industry was doing in reaction to what you guys had done.
So being, we were all fans of games like this, right? So we played everything that came out. And, one of the things that I love about the games industry, it was true then and it's true now, is that at least inside the industry, people keep a lot fewer secrets than I think you might expect. So for example, our studio heads and the Blizzard studio heads, they were talking. They actually had our exec team up to play World of Warcraft in their office in a very early version. I wasn't one of those people, but so people are generally very, there's a lot of desire to get along and a lot of desire to truly share information and share feedback. And so, we saw, of course, like Dark Age of Camelot came around at our, soon after we launched. That's a friend of mine launched that game, Mark Jacobs. He is, and he did a fantastic job, but he went after a different audience very intentionally. He went after PvPers, and we knew that, there were some portion of our audience that liked PvP, but it wasn't the majority. So great, we can both coexist, and we did. And so we tried all the games that came out, and a lot of people ran into the same problems that the original EverQuest team had, which was there's a lot of tech they need to invent, very little time for iteration once you are build it once you are done building. And they were just lucky to get something launched of an acceptable quality. There wasn't really, an 800-pound gorilla, until exactly like you described, like Blizzard came in and said, we want to do the Blizzard version of this. And the Blizzard version of this is going to involve a lot more people, a lot more iteration, a ton of existing tech, and an amazing gameplay sense.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about sort of the friendliness and sharing of information between different companies. I'm not sure if you've caught it yet, but I've recently been going through John Statz's book, who was one of the devs on World of Warcraft, and he wrote a full-on diary about the development process of World of Warcraft, and he was making extensive notes at the time, and has recently published, he raised almost $500,000 on Kickstarter and had this really wildly successful launch of his book. And he mentions in the book that whilst, yes, he absolutely elaborates on what you're saying, that there is a general friendliness and sense of camaraderie between, developers and whatnot, he really made it sound that there was somewhat of a tongue-in-cheek bit of espionage going on as well, in terms of they'd show you stuff, but it might be older stuff. They didn't want to show you the new changes that they'd made and whatnot. Did you get that sense that maybe you don't show all your cards because at the end of the day, even though you're friends, there's still, money on the line?
Oh yeah. And yeah, you're very correct. When I described that, what I probably should have said was that we generally always know what other companies, what other projects are going on at what companies. Nobody shares 100% of the details of everything though. Right. But yeah, it was and when our exec team went up there to get their chance to play, the reaction was kind of telling, because on our side, the folks from our studio that visited, largely came back and went, phew, we don't really have anything to worry about. It's a much more casual game than ours. And the thinking, of course, since we're the hardcore studio, that, oh, well, there's no way that a more casual version of what we're doing is going to catch on and be bigger than what we are. Surprise.
Yeah, definitely. Now, as Gnorin, I'll got one more and then I'll throw to you, mate. So think of one that syncs up with this timeline. But we get to the moments where, more and more instances of the game being shown off, whether it's at gaming shows, and then we get into things like the beta days. Just prior to release, as you've said, you weren't terribly fussed because you felt like it was the game for casuals. But as you saw more and more, and as you perhaps played more and more, whether any of your guys were involved in playing the beta as well, did you start to sweat a little bit?
So at the time, that would have been, just call it, around the same time that we started beta for EverQuest 2. I was playing the betas for both games. And, so yes, I am fluent in classic WoW. I'm fluent all the way up through, Wrath. And yeah, of course, the reaction was, holy shit, this is not a casual game. This is an endless pile of Skittles, and it is a wonderful thing that people are never going to log out of. And that was our take ahead of its launch. Yeah, after we got in and play it ourselves.
All right. Gnorin, you got something?
Yeah, so after seeing, I guess, after the launch of World of Warcraft, was there any sort of a sense that some of those changes to the hardcore systems that EverQuest had, was there any sort of a conversation that we should change, X, Y, Z to kind of match that to try to retain player base? Because at least being on the ground floor, at one point I was playing classic WoW and I was still playing EverQuest, and the sense in the game, in EverQuest rather, was that sort of the steps, the stages of what's the phrase?
The stages of grief.
The 5 stages of grief. There's like a lot of denial about the existence of the game. But then you start to see that the player base is shrinking kind of regularly. And was there any sort of a conversation that, maybe we should implement some of these aspects that World of Warcraft kind of gave birth to? Was it very strict, like let's stay the course?
Let me say first that is a wildly inappropriate comparison to use the stages of grief. That said, that was a hilarious comparison. Yeah, and I think you pretty much nailed it. So it was less about a structured, okay, this has happened, a switch has been thrown, and it was more of, remember how a couple of minutes ago I was describing that a lot of our tuning discussions ended up being around, hey, what kind of game are we? Are we this hardcore thing, or are we wanting to be more accessible? Those kinds of discussions have been happening feature by feature, whether it was teleportation, whether it was death penalties, whether it was group penalties, whether it was racial XP penalties. Those kinds of discussions have been happening, for our identity, for our soul, for years. And I will say, though, that as time went on, yes, more of those discussions did start going more toward the idea of perhaps we should think about filing off some of these ultra pokey bits and ultra, spiky parts and rough edges.
We saw much later on, kind of down the track. At that point, I'm not even sure that you were still with EverQuest, but there was the implementation of mercenaries that you could buy.
Yeah.
It essentially took away the need to form a group with people because you had NPCs that would fill those roles. And to me, with EverQuest, it was always it was the sense of relying on other players that made the game for me. That you kind of had to, after say level 5 or 6, most classes, you needed to form a group with people in order to achieve any sort of a goal, whether it was leveling, going after loot, what have you. And then once you start to see that kind of change later on down the track is kind of when the game lost me.
Yeah.
And while you did touch on teleports, as someone who has a druid class tattoo on his forearm, I will say that it's wildly inappropriate that you implemented my
income my friend. No, that's absolutely fair. Yeah, so I was playing a wizard at the time, so I feel your pain. But yeah, I think, and that's the thing, right? Is so when I think back at that, I think how much is cause and how much is effect, right? Because, World of Warcraft came out, hit the market, incredibly popular, obviously for more reasons just than its approachability. But so, how much of our going toward accessibility was influenced by World of Warcraft, and how much of it was kind of like this evolution of the MMO gaming audience in the first place? And the reason that I bring that up is that, yes, there are still hardcore games with hardcore mechanics out there in the MMO space, but they're not generally played by millions of people. They're played by thousands of people. EVE Online notwithstanding. That is the exception to every rule in the universe. But so there aren't a lot of things where you actually have lost to other players or lost to system, outside of, certain RNG mechanics in certain free-to-play games. But so it's how much of it was caused by WoW and how much of it was an evolution of the gaming culture? And I kind of go back and forth on that myself.
I think one of the biggest, juxtapositions, I guess, would be the concept of instancing from World of Warcraft, where it doesn't really exist in EverQuest. There was that implementation with Lost Dungeons in Narath and with Depths of Dark Hollow that had those sort of instanced scripted dungeons, but the main raid targets as a whole were sort of that all open world type thing, whereas World of Warcraft, everything is instanced.
Yeah.
Now, was there any sort of a belief that, let's leave the bosses that we have, leave it up to kind of the guilds to duke it out to get there? Or was there kind of a look at it and be like, oh, maybe that is a good idea? Was that sort of the same thing as the conversation of what type of game you want to be? Or did you see that there's this competition in World of Warcraft to sort of get through that content now rather than just get to the boss first?
Yeah. I mean, competition for the right to play the content was something that, EverQuest is one of the final ones to really do that. You don't see a whole lot of that at scale anymore. And yeah, it was very much a strong decision to say that, look, that if we can have all these other discussions about teleportation and whatnot, but that is definitely part of our core identity. at least for a time, right? Because as we know, everything evolves and everything changes. But no, there were absolutely conversations about that.
Scott, I'll jump in at this point and just ask, we see World of Warcraft, and again, we're talking about a time between 2004 to, let's say, 2006. We see the subscription numbers going up and up and up at an exponential rate. You guys are over there. You're watching that. At that point, you may well be deep into the development of EverQuest 2. Now, I should look up. What year did EverQuest 2 come out again?
We moved. I had my launch date moved up to beat World of Warcraft by 5 days.
So you guys did come out, because I'm pulling up 8th of November 2004.
I believe it was.
That's right. Now World of Warcraft, I had thought it was right. Yeah, you're right around that time. Oh yes, 23rd of November. So you guys beat it by just about 2 weeks.
No, 5 days. Yeah. Because they had their open thingy. Yeah, it was just days before. It was just days before them. It was crazy.
Okay.
And the game needed it, at least in my opinion, and the opinion of most of the people on the team, it needed, we wanted months more of beta and iteration, because so much of that game, so much of the launch content in that game had only been built in the prior, call it 9 to 11 months, and had no player iteration yet.
Okay.
That's one place where, one of the other places where Blizzard just does such a phenomenal job. They had the latitude to play their own content multiple times and play it with players, and actually have the ability to react to it.
Now, with that, there was, in that same PC Gamer article, there was a quote from John Smedley that was saying that, you were able to kind of create that game under the radar almost entirely. Now, was there a point that, from the executives at Sony, from the Tokyo office, I guess. Now, was there a period of time closer to launch that it was like, okay, well, if you have this date, now they're looking at you and it's like, okay, let's get it out. Was there any sort of a rush to get through that beta scenario?
Oh, I see. So that Smed's comment in the PC Gamer article was largely about the original launch of the first EverQuest, where, Japan by and large had no idea, what this weird project was that the sports studio was working on, with this little group of weirdos in the corner. But by the EverQuest 2 time, they were fully supportive of the idea of SOE being the MMO studio and working on EQ2. So everybody all the way up through Sony Pictures and then all the way on to Sony Japan knew about us. I had a very important exec from Sony Pictures, who I won't name, but he is a famous name, come to my office for a demo and loved the visual effects, loved everything else, and then promptly fell asleep. It was very engrossing stuff, and it was good times.
Very good. Now, I just want to, now knowing that, yes, EverQuest 2 and WoW, obviously right there launching almost side by side. As you guys were going along, and I've really been intrigued by, what I sort of term as the MMO space race around this time, when MMOs are now a thing. People are now competing, as I said, for the hearts and minds and wallets of these players. What was happening over at Sony as WoW's doing its thing? Its subscription numbers are going through the roof. You guys are going through the EverQuest 2 launch. You're riding that wave and trying to get people in on your product. Were you, were the Sony guys also playing a boatload of WoW, trying to figure out, okay, they do this really well, let's see if we can incorporate that? And I know that Gadoran alluded to this earlier with EverQuest, but also focusing on EverQuest 2, were any deliberate changes made to be more WoW-like, or were you trying to be very different?
Well, so it's funny. So we were trying to be very different, but the thing is, we wanted to be the best version of our game that we possibly could. And I don't think anybody, even on our own team, thought we had hit that bar. And I'll just give you an example. So, of course I played, World of Warcraft beta, and I played World of Warcraft launch. I was playing EQ2 beta and EQ2 launch at the same time. Me, one of our QA people and one of our systems designers decided to start EQ2 clean as players, no cheats, no nothing, and just get the player experience to see what could we do to make us a better us. And we got to about level 13 in the game, and we just looked at each other and all went, this game is not fun to us. Holy crap. It's too hardcore. It's too, it's not rewarding enough, because the bar previously for how often do you reward players and how much are players expecting to be rewarded was previously set by EverQuest. And the answer to that was, well, they're getting XP every time they kill a mob, so that's a little tiny reward. Back when EXP still felt like a reward. But meanwhile, then you have World of Warcraft showering people with massive bursts of XP every time they do a quest. When I was using the Skittles analogy earlier, that's what I was referring to. It's this never-ending hit of, oh, this is fun. Oh, hey, I just got a great reward. And we just didn't have that sense. And so we were trying to figure out is how do we make the moment-to-moment gameplay feel more fun and more rewarding? Because we certainly had the challenge part nailed. We had all the punishment parts, done in some cases harder core than EverQuest. But we didn't really figure out how to make it feel rewarding. And it took us a couple of expansion cycles, I think, before we really hit what I think would be EQ2's stride of, where it was able to then, go do its thing from there.
Was there anything in either, whether it should have been in EverQuest or EverQuest 2, was there anything that WoW did that you saw that personally made you think, fuck, I wish we'd thought of that?
Oh, let me think. If I had to, really pick one, yes, there are a few of them for starters, but I don't want to just, pick a random one that's kind of meaningless. And I would really just say the entire questing structure, because at the time it was viewed as absolutely revolutionary. These days, people look at, games and people are advertising the fact that their game doesn't have exclamation mark farms. But back then, the exclamation marks were like manna from heaven. And that was like the thing that, really grabbed people, and kept them in and guided them through the land. That was the thing that they did just tremendously, tremendously well. And honestly, I think that structure set up so much of their future success that they were able to build on.
I will add that I am glad that the quest structure in EverQuest never changed to conform to what those newer games came out. No, really, I loved having to, you read these walls of text that these NPCs give you, and you have to find the keywords, and you have to answer specifically according to those keywords. And you almost have to, I used to have notebooks of these are the quest items that I need to get. This is where I need to go for this. They give you clues, but don't say specifically go to this zone and go look for this thing. They give you sort of like a general description of something, which is kind of how it would be in the real world. It's like, as opposed to the Warcraft side where it's like, this is what you want. This is what you have to kill. Go here to do it. I'm very glad that never changed.
Yeah. And same here. That was definitely part of EverQuest's core identity. It didn't have as many quests as a World of Warcraft, right? But the ones that it did have were, possibly more meaningful or definitely more challenging, right? I was even when I was playing the first EverQuest, I was a huge fan of that type of gameplay myself.
Now, I do have a question regarding some of the quest lines in EverQuest were, I guess, either unfinished or I don't want to say broken. I guess I would say unfinished. Was there ever sort of a sense that you would want to go back to finish up old quests, or was it like, that expansion's done, let's move on to the next?
There was always the desire. There was very seldom the resources or time. 100% of the desire, we always had the desire to go back and fix everything up to all the way and including launch content, right? And as a matter of fact, there would be this group of us. It was not uncommon for, a good chunk of us to be busting our ass during the work week, working overtime just to try to get that latest expansion out, and then come in on weekends to try to add stuff in or fix stuff for the live game. This might sound kind of damaged, but, it's, what a bunch of us did, which was, hey, if I can come in on a Saturday and make it through 30 bugs out of a live queue, holy crap, to me, this is hilarious amounts of fun. I love this. This is a joyful activity for me. I am spending my time making changes to a thing that are going to make other people smile, right? At the end of the day, we're in a technology, but also entertainment business, no different than putting on a play. And so, by bringing joy to other people, that is what we do. And if that meant coming in on weekends to do it, then by God, that's what we did.
Just as another aside, there was one quest that was completed. It was in Halls of Honor called the Symbol of Ducey. And it was, 2016. There was a post on the Blizzard forums, that it was finally solved. It's 14 years later. So that's just to kind of give listeners who are unfamiliar with EverQuest kind of the sort of in-depth thing you have to go through to get those quests done.
Yeah, so that particular expansion was, that was a Plains of Power era expansion, or Plains of Power era quest, and that was the first expansion cycle where one of our programmers created a scripting language. The game didn't have a scripting language before that, and so the designers were using a scripting language for the first time, and it's one of those cases where we just wish they would have had another 3 or 6 months just to understand how to use it better and train themselves, because they were all very, very smart people. But it's like, handing somebody a chainsaw, pointing them to forest and telling them, hey, good luck. It's a tool. Use it. Practice helps.
Scott, I'll jump in and just ask, just on a more, sort of macro level, as you guys, you're plugging away, you're doing your best with EverQuest 2, sort of trying to make that game the best that it could be, as you said. But in the rearview mirror, I'm sure you must have, been keeping an eye on what WoW was doing. Now, my general question is, yourself personally, Sony, the industry in general, everyone outside of that Blizzard bubble at the time, were you shocked by what was happening with WoW?
Yes and no. So yes, in the sense that, one thing you should keep in mind is that from the point of view of somebody who was working in the industry at the time, the thing that we kept being told over and over again, whether it was by analysts, whether it was by news sites, whether it was by, everybody who has an opinion that matters, is that online gaming is a niche. Nobody's really interested in playing connected games the way they are interested in playing standalone games, and the global cap for number of users who are willing to play these types of games is maybe, 1 million people total worldwide. And so we heard that drilled into us for years. And, so we start playing World of Warcraft, and, we're like, I know what I've been being told by people who are allegedly smart, but look at this thing, right? And so, something just didn't really jive in there. And obviously proved itself out that, no, players will play quality game.
I think also that there's, with at least World of Warcraft, Warcraft Orcs and Humans came out in 1994. So by the time that World of Warcraft launched 10 years later, there were 3 games that people had known and played and grown to love.
Yep.
So I think there was a lot of brand loyalty because those titles were fantastic in their own right. So there's only sort of that. That's what drew me to World of Warcraft, was that I played Warcraft 2 when I was like 6, 7 years old on Saturday mornings when my brother wasn't kicking me off the computer. And when I saw that this game was coming out, that's what drew me to try it out.
Yeah. It's in a lot of ways, EverQuest had to build its own IP up, IP from the ground up, where, building an MMO in the Warcraft IP, it's essentially as big of a leap forward, if not bigger, than, say, building one in the Marvel IP, right? It's among the audience that you're trying to reach, the name Warcraft is already crazy beloved. And if it's not beloved, then at least people have heard of it.
Scott, I'll take you to a moment in time later down the track where obviously you move on from Sony and you start to get involved with Trion and Rift. Now, a number of listeners have, perked up about this and they're excited to get your take on Rift. But why don't you tell us a little bit about what you had learned from the EverQuest days, what you had seen and were still seeing going on with WoW doing what it was, and what your plans were to incorporate any of that into Rift and what the new game plan was?
Sure, I'm happy to tell you that because it's a very, very easy answer for me. So I think the most foundational thing that that was a good learning moment for me and was something that I've tried to use as a teaching moment for other people. And that is, there was a moment in time came on the first EverQuest where something had happened. We had hit a bad billing cycle and our subscriber numbers dropped, pretty heavily. This was pre-World of Warcraft. And we had been, the team had been crunching on two different activities. Half the team had been working on the next expansion. The other half of us had been working largely on some international localizations that we had to do. We got the word from on high that we had to go launch in Korea and China and Japan. And there was absolutely nothing about the first EverQuest that made it work in any of those languages. So it was a very, very long-term project. But so you'll notice that there was something that I left out of the list that we were working on, and that's called working on the live game and keeping live players happy. And so we got the word from on high then that, holy shit, guys, you need to do something about this live service. Look at what just happened to the numbers. And the whole team dropped everything else. We all came together. We put together the best patch the game had ever seen, and fixed up ton of classic bugs, really got to pay attention to some stuff that we were dying to get time to fix. And just hit it out of the park and put the game on a growth path again, like 4 or 5 years after launch, and actually hit its subscriber peak in the months following. And so what we really did there was prove to ourselves, and we had hoped to prove to our bosses, that look, by paying attention to your live game is the best goddamn thing you can do for the financial performance of this game. There is a direct line between happy players and money coming in. So, dear God, please, would you let us spend more time working on the happy player part? That's all we want to do. And I am happy to say that, the local management got it, but, for a bunch of finance reasons that were outside of my pay grade at the time, we unfortunately had to keep doing what we were doing, which, set the stage for, what happened in the future.
Okay. So you get to a phase where obviously Rift is about to launch. How were you feeling about that game at the time around its launch and what effect it would have on MMO players and how successful it would be?
I was very, very, very happy with that. So when I came into Trion, the team had already been building up their own tech, and they had the game, and they had been, the tech and game they had been working on for probably 4 years at that point. And, so we came in, we redid a bunch, inside the game to make it more of the game that we thought we would enjoy playing, which also we thought we could, turn into a real business. And I actually had the leeway as EP of that game to do the kinds of iterative stuff that had been, have a dog.
That's all right.
Oh, that's hilarious. My dog hears your cat. That's what that was. So anyway, when we had launched EverQuest 2, when we had launched expansions in the past, there was largely here is the beta, do some patches, here is the launch. That's it. With Rift, we went into our first player alpha publicly 13 months before launch, and we began treating it as a live service from that day going forward. We got the team into a weekly update cycle with the ability to do daily hotfixes, which meant we could adjust to stuff going on the servers pretty damn rapidly. If not within the hour, then definitely within the day or the week. We did 8 beta launches where we dress rehearsed the entire launch day process, all 150 steps on the checklist, no different than, almost very Apollo 13-esque, right? Where, making sure that we know exactly what we're doing. By the time we got to launch on Rift, honestly, it was the easiest launch I had ever had because we had been through all the traumatic fuck-ups in, launching Alpha 1, launching Alpha 2. We had plenty of time to iron it out. On the gameplay side, I would call my happiness maybe an 8 out of 10. We made a game that attracted way more players than we thought. There were design decisions that we made along the way where we chose to emphasize things that are more traditional MMO and less of the stuff that made us special. So we had, our own, we were doing dynamic content in the world before most people were, definitely way before WoW ever did, before Guild Wars and so on. I wish we would have gotten more out of that system and pushed on that because that really made us unique. The shared world events, the big mass world events, those I think we did by and large, hit out of the park, but the massive scale ones, the tech just wasn't ready for yet. So it was a bit of a mixed bag there. So I think that the biggest thing for me was I was very pleased because we actually got to iterate, but still I wish we would have had more time pre-launch.
Well, Rift launched at a time, obviously it was, in 2011 when you had the roadmap for MMORPGs for some time now. You'd seen everything through EverQuest, EverQuest 2 and WoW, what was happening and what players sort of might gravitate towards. And I guess I would ask that having now seen a fair few years of WoW success, was there elements of Rift that were like, we're really going to try and replicate that? Or were you still defiant in that, no, we have to offer a drastically different experience?
Yeah, so we had, obviously it was impossible to have a conversation on any MMO team post World of Warcraft and not have many of your discussions be WoW, if only because everybody knew it as a point of reference, right? And so a lot of our conversations were, how are we making ourselves unique, and what are the places we don't need to care? One of the old analogies that I used a lot was our class system, for instance. I want it to be approachable by World of Warcraft players, but I don't want it to be exactly World of Warcraft, because we knew that lapsed WoW players were going to make up a massive, massive chunk of our audience, and that turned out to be true. And so I was very glad that we nailed it with the class system that let people, for people who saw the WoW talent trees, giving them less choice over time, we went hard the opposite direction. We erred on the side of giving them too much choice. But at the same time, on a system like that, we will put a ton of effort. On a system like in-game mail, who cares? Nobody is clamoring for in-game mail innovation, but people want better combat, better classes, better abilities, better encounters, better stuff to do. And so I was pretty pleased with where we ended up on that.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that talent tree system because we got a question from listener Phalor in stream who's asked this. Hi Scott, my favorite feature of Rift was the soul system. Every level you got to pick a new talent from a class and your character could dip into 3 classes. Back then, many MMOs were integrating talent systems, but Rift was actively trying to evolve it with multi-classing. My question is, was it challenging to get buy-in for a talent tree system? Sorry, I'll repeat that while my cat meows. My question is, was it challenging to get buy-in for a talent tree system since many players associated it with WoW, or was there internal resistance to be more diverse?
This is one of the few advantages that you will find about being the executive producer on a game, is you get to make there not be resistance to it when it's your idea. So the way the whole thing came up, it was me and our dev director, were in a conference room. We had looked at the class system that had existed in game at the time. And it was a bit of a stub. This was, maybe 2 years before launch or a year and a half before launch. And it just ended up as a whiteboard conversation. I was like, well, what if we did this? And it was like, it's a talent tree, but there's things that you can get as you level to fill it in, so you're always getting something, because we want there to feel like our systems are rewarding you for advancing. And I kind of sketched out just a horrible looking version on the whiteboard, and he just looked at me and went, yeah, I'd play that. And then we took it to, a gameplay lead and a programming lead and said, what do you guys think about this? And the programming, the gameplay lead looked at it and went, yeah, I'd play that. The programming lead looked at that and went, I might be able to actually have a prototype of that up in a week. And so we went, holy shit, well, let's stop talking. And then we were up and playing a prototype of it in about a week, and we liked it.
Fantastic. I'll move on to, maybe a post-Rift environment where, we talked about how describing the MMO landscape now and how it's changed over the years. We've come a long way since those development years of EverQuest, the release in 99, I believe it was, and, everything that's happened in 20 plus years in this genre. And people complain going, I loved this genre. What's happening to it? Why is it dying? Why won't they release games anymore? Why won't they release good games? What is going on? And I know it's a very broad question that could go in a million different directions, but how would you describe your take on what's happening with MMORPGs in a modern landscape?
It is definitely, the last year or two has been very interesting, right? Cause you're right. You have a lot of the core, what you and I would call MMOs, either, remaining stagnant or tapering off, or subsisting, successfully, but doing so on lapsed players, where players, they tire out, they leave, they reactivate, they play for a few months, they leave, that kind of thing. And you can make a reasonably good business doing that, and a number of games are. But that side of the market, you're right, is not growing. So what is growing? You look at games like, games that have gameplay like Destiny, that share, that look like Warframe, that look like Path of Exile, that look like Division 2, right? These are games that kind of understand that, similar to how I think the mass of gaming players evolved very dramatically between EverQuest and the World of Warcraft era, you're now seeing another evolution between the World of Warcraft, Rift, Final Fantasy, Guild Wars era, and then these other games, which are actually bringing in more players. And that is, people want to be, modern people want to be more in charge of their own time, and part of that means they're willing to commit to smaller individual slices, but they'll be happy to play those thin slices over and over and over again for hours. I'll use Path of Exile because that's a thing that a lot of people are familiar with, and Warframe it will work with too. Warframe you can play for 12 hours a day. No single mission is going to last you, an average Warframe mission is like 5 minutes. You can extend them and play endless missions to play for 60 minutes if you want, so 120. But the average Warframe mission is like 5 minutes. But you can play that 5-minute mission over and over and over again. Path of Exile, which I think is a brilliant, brilliant game, and I love it dearly. Same deal. It's a 3-minute map. Some people speed run them in a minute and a half. But you can do that for hours and hours and hours. And the classic type of MMOs just don't fit that level of, that same way, method of time allocation that people really have in their games. If I queue up for a dungeon in Rift, and that queue pops, I know what I am doing for the next probably 25 minutes of my life. As opposed to when I hit go on a Warframe mission, it's 3 minutes, whatever. So I think I think that you've seen games, I think that you've seen audience, the audience has evolved and games are evolving to fit.
Given what you've just said, obviously, on this podcast, we talk World of Warcraft Classic. Mm-hmm. How do you think that particular product, given that it is something from what is perhaps a bygone era now being dropped in a modern gaming landscape, how do you think from a producer's angle that may fare?
I'm very, very happy that they did it. And I think that, so I have a few thoughts on the subject. So I'm very happy that they're doing it. I think that to do it right, there are very few people that could do it an incredibly clean and incredibly good job, and Blizzard is probably the only one. Because it takes a massive, massive, massive team to be able to live up to what I think players' expectations are going to be. And I think that Blizzard is probably going to put their resources where their mouth is on that one. If you step back up from the 10,000 foot view, a lot of it though is, it's a way for an established live game to bring in a bunch of lapsed people and give them something to do. And maybe they do it for a few months. And then maybe they lapse and then maybe they come back and it's great. So it's just one more, hopefully, healthy part of their business that helps keep it stable and doing well for many years to come.
I think there is a little bit of a shift back, or at least in the MMO community, there's a shift back towards that sort of time investment aspect. Because we see, of course, we see World of Warcraft Classic. EverQuest has done its progression servers as well. There's a private server I play that's EverQuest. It's been 10 years. I think it's been around for 10 years now, but it's only at Velius, and it's just sitting there.
We did one for Rift called Rift Prime also. So, I'm with you.
Yeah. So, we have games like Division and Destiny and things like that, where it's sort of small, incremental, fast paced. You get your gear from doing it. And then now with the advent of microtransactions and sort of like the backlash from where that's gone to, I think you do see that shift towards like, oh, well, I want to play a game that I know was good. We have these studios that are releasing games that sort of feel unfinished or, they're just not as fun. So people go back to these titles that, they're like, oh, this is a great time. I miss that. I want to play it again. So I think there still is sort of, there is a market for that. And I think that with, the release of things like World of Warcraft Classic, that there's going to be more that follow suit, because a lot of companies followed suit in Blizzard's direction after, World of Warcraft was such a massive success.
I totally agree. And, so keeping in mind that I know absolutely nothing about their plans and I know nothing of the inside here, but if I am in their shoes, the way I would make that decision is I would look at the number of people who, fell out of the game between launch and say Wrath or Burning Crusade, and say, is that a group of people, is that a sufficiently large enough people that I can go market to them and I can make them aware that this thing is going to exist? Because clearly they must have enjoyed this. And how many of them can I get to come in and play? And how long do I think they'll play? And is that going to be, am I going to make my money back if I, then put the, people hours, the many, many, probably hundreds of thousands of people hours into making this service happen. And hopefully you come out, you do that math and you figure out that it's going to work and work well. And I really hope it does for them.
I think it's definitely something that, people call me crazy for, various reasons, but when I say this, because I don't think it's outside of the realm of plausibility that MMORPGs do come roaring back into a fashion in terms of that old school playstyle, because as listeners are pointing out in Twitch stream, yes, you've obviously got something like, Brad McQuaid working away on Pantheon at the moment, which is very much so that old EQ style game. You've got World of Warcraft Classic coming roaring back into the fold, which we all hope and pray will do so well upon launch. We shall see. But, everything is kind of cyclical in terms of fashion as well. We not only talk about clothing or TV or movies, what have you, things come back. The things that from the 80s have come roaring back into fashion, which we thought would never be popular again. And I just feel like that longer, slower, more rewarding, drawn out gameplay style that old school MMOs have might actually come back to appeal to a newer generation. And I think World of Warcraft Classic is a really good, testing point for that mentality. So, I think it's really cool to see where we're going to go with all of it.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I think one of the other, whenever I try to make that cyclical argument, the place I always go is I go and start talking about the Souls games. Because if you look at what's made games bigger and bigger and bigger over the years, it's always been making them easier and more approachable and easier and more approachable. And then the Souls games come out and it's literally, they punch you in the face. That is your introduction. Here's your tutorial, you're dead. Here's your next step of the tutorial, you're dead. Which is like the exact opposite of anything anybody thought was going to be successful. And lo and behold, you're right. There are people who want this harder core experience. And so I think this is kind of analogous to a debate that we used to have on the EQ1 team all the time, is difficulty versus time. They are not the same thing, and we need to not equate them, because a lot of the time in certain players' minds, they do equate them. And even in some developers' minds, they equated them. And so, how do you make sure that if you are doing something that's going to take time, are you doing, are you skewing the expectation more on player time commitment, or are you skewing it more on players' ability to overcome difficulty? And so that, I think, will be another interesting thing to see where they land when they launch this service.
Definitely. Now, just quickly, I'd love to get your take, Scott, on another sort of, whether you call it a blight on the industry or not. Sorry, my cat is killing me. But, people talk about things like microtransactions, and I know that many producers and developers would say they are a necessary evil now. But what's your take on their place in the industry, and do you think they're going anywhere anytime soon?
So, I've done obviously subscription and retail launches. I've done conversions to free to play, and I've done free to play launches. As a gamer and game developer, the thing that I wish, or the thing that I regret the strongest, is that game developers have to spend brain power on how much money their game is making and not purely on gameplay. That is an evolution that has happened as a result of bringing more monetization into the gameplay. As a consumer of games, I've never been a fan of that. As a person trying to keep a company running, I have understood that it is mandatory if you want people to have jobs. And people who have jobs tend to want to keep them. And they begin understanding how important the money coming into the company is to them, keeping jobs and us going on to build bigger, better things. I would say it's a mixed bag. I would say that in online games where there are real costs to running the service. So for instance, one of our games, it's not unheard of for a game's back end to cost you $1 million a month. That money needs to come from somewhere. If you are not a subscription game, it's got to be microtransactions, right? But for games, the places that I'm less fond of it are traditional single player games. I'm not a huge console gamer, so but if I were a console gamer who was buying, a $50 console game, I'm not as sure how it makes sense to have another $500 of cosmetic microtransactions in a single player game. But, that seems to be a thing that makes sense to somebody. So, so like I said, I can understand it more on the MMO side. I understand why people do it because the costs are so exorbitant on the back end. But on the single player side, not as sure.
Okay.
You definitely hit the point. That I was going to make, that with microtransactions being cosmetic. I think that is the exception to my hatred of microtransactions. Because I think if people enjoy a game, and they want to spend extra money to make themselves, look a certain way, I think that's all right. But when you get to aspects of games like the Star Wars game that came out, that was the huge one, where it was like you could get Darth Vader, but it required, this much money or X amount of hours of work.
Battlefront 2.
To the Battlefront, that's what it was. And then we had the Call of Duty Modern Warfare remaster come out, and when it came out, it was fine. And then they introduced these loot boxes, and you could get these guns that were not in the original game, and they sort of seem overpowered in some sense. And I think that is where the fault is that you have access to these things that aren't really in the game any other way than buying them. And I'm completely with you on that one. So one of the unique things that, I've been in the situation of is having done an online game conversion, which started out as, a subscription and box game and then ended up going free to play. Cosmetics only become crazy challenging in that environment, because you've previously built an entire game where the entire point of the game is level up, beat cooler enemies, or beat harder enemies, get cooler stuff, show it off, right? That's the engagement loop in a classic MMO. When you take that MMO and you make it go free to play, you've now just built an entire game around, free to play, great cosmetics are what you earn. Shit, what do I sell to pay the bills? Right. When we did, early in the days of the Rift, conversion, for instance, I'll tell you the number flat out. It was like 3% of all of our sales came from selling cosmetics.
and that would not have kept the game alive. And so, that team had to go in a different direction. And so with conversions in particular, it's just hard as hell to figure out what can we do that's actually going to, let us keep supporting this game. But again, like with the Star Wars game that you mentioned with Battlefront, I'll tell you, that was a real head scratcher over here. I won't pretend to guess, that I know what was going on in their heads either, but, it didn't make a lot of sense to me either.
Blizzard gets a lot of, but just real quick, just on that mount point, Blizzard gets a lot of flack on that point in terms of the retail version of the game currently available for the liberalisms that they take with sort of offering mounts at, hey, here it is on discount, get it before it disappears from the game, then they take it away from the game, then they reintroduce it in the game a year later and go, look, it's back, you can buy it again. And I don't know the full ins and outs, so I won't comment too much, but I do find it interesting sort of the ways in which, the people who do have to stare at the bottom line make these choices to say, look, we need this extra source of money coming in. It helps us put more back into the game. What can we do? And yes, some of it rubs the community the wrong way, but I mean, it's just, horses for courses, I guess.
So not to show you all how ridiculously horribly old I am, but who pioneered that model of what you just described? That's Disney.
Ah, of course, with the, putting it in limited release in, with their movies.
Yep. And so Disney did it. And then later on in online games, Blizzard's doing it. Warframe does it with Warframe even calls it vaulting. And it is, of all of the things you can do to earn money, people tend to, if there is a negative perception to it, it tends to be at least a mild one. And it is effective at, bringing in more money for you to use to build more stuff. So I'm a fan of that model personally.
Yeah, fair enough. Gnoran, sorry I cut you off before, mate. What did you have?
Oh, no, I was just going to make a point that I feel like the Battlefront scenario was sort of the far side of the pendulum swinging. That it's, I don't know, maybe going to start making its way back.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Now, Scott, I've just got Gnoran, I'd ask, think of, any, one major EQ question you might have not had a chance to ask yet. I've got a couple of final questions for Scott as we sort of turn on the final turn now for this call. But Scott, if I were to ask you, given everything you've known, everything you've learnt about the industry over the years, if you were to get one more crack at it, and I don't know what you might be working on at the moment or what's down the road, for you, but if you were to have one more crack at an MMO, for the next project that you work on, what would be your sort of the design principles behind your dream MMO right now in 2019?
That is a very, very challenging one. And I can tell you that I'm spending no shortage of time on that, on that issue right now. So I can't go into a whole lot of details.
Ooh.
But what I can say is, well, what? Come on. Just because you sell a company doesn't mean that, you're dead or you're not going to go back.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm with you.
I'll be making games till the day I drop dead, I'm pretty sure. And that's no secret. But, I think communities are very important to me. I mentioned this to you when we were chatting before, is that, fanfares and interacting with communities one-on-one, one-on-one, in, the bars the bars after the panels or during the panels, and seeing, the way communities, grow and communities connect with each other. Figuring out what types of gameplay fosters those kinds of connections in a healthy way, is paramount to me. And I think that, that's the kind of thing that I would definitely want to see more of in the future. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
Now, Scott, I know you can't go into details and I wouldn't press you, but if it's Battle Chess the MMO, I need to know. Just scratch your nose twice if that's what it is.
No, I'm more of a co-op guy than a PvP guy, and Battle Chess is about as hardcore PvP as it gets, man. You lose entire pieces. I mean, they can loot your whole board. Forget that.
Now, I'm guessing, and I didn't want to sort of make it sound like you were retired and done and dusted with the industry. Obviously, you absolutely will more than likely move on to bigger and better things in the next project. But without going into details about what you are working on, I think it would be fair to say that you probably still, go to bed every night dreaming of MMORPGs. Would that be fair to say?
Oh, I'm still playing them, of course. Yeah, I mean, it's both things. So, I haven't, so I haven't played WoW since, since Wrath or so, and I think that feels to me like it was a great place to cap my WoW career. But so I may come back for Classic because that's the stuff I remember fondly too. One of the people that I just don't think gets enough credit, and I mean, they're a huge company, but I think Square has done a tremendous job with Final Fantasy. I was never a big Final Fantasy head, but I got dragged into their MMO and I'm like, holy crap, these guys did an amazing job. So yeah, I mean, I think, I definitely spend a lot of time, both immersing myself in the worlds that still exist, as well as thinking about where we should take it all forward, for sure.
Okay. Now, it is interesting to hear you say that you might dive into Classic, and that was my final question for you, is that, granted, you said it's great that Blizzard's doing it, if anyone was going to do it, it was them, but, can you say to people, like, you absolutely have plans on checking it out? What did you play back in the day? What are you thinking of playing again?
Oh man. So I rolled up, my first character ever was an orc hunter on Garona. And as far as I know, he's still there. And then later on, when the Blood Elves came out, actually, no, wait. Then I ended up rolling an Alliance hunter because I wanted to play with a different group of friends. Back in the era when none of us were really playing World of Warcraft, we were playing this game called Alterac Valley Online for 12 hours at a crack. And then, actually, funny enough, one of the EverQuest lead gameplay programmer, was one of the highest ranks. I think he was the number one ranked, on Alliance on our server in AV at that point. And so yeah, I would probably come back and play my Orc Hunter because he was my first, and he was just fantastic.
All right, are you a PvP?
That's what I like to hear.
Yeah, that's what we like to hear. Are you a PvP kind of person?
We originally, what was it? No, we were always on a PvE server, but we did do instance PvP just a ton.
Okay, well, if you happen to change your mind, if you ever want to dabble into the waters of a PvP server, you're more than welcome to roll with the Countdown crew. We'd love to have you. Now, Ganoran, I'll throw on to you for, I know you've probably had a million EQ questions, and unfortunately we haven't been able to get to some of them, but if you had to tie off with one, what have you been dying to know all these years about EQ from Scott?
Well, before I ask any sort of question, I just want to thank you very much. You brought a game that I hold very near and dear to my heart. There's a lot of connections I have in my real life between family and friends that still to this day we'll talk about things that have happened in EverQuest. This is now almost 20 years ago. Just on the verge of it, actually. There's going to be a San Diego Comic-Con Museum is having a couple days of sort of to honor 20 years of EverQuest. My question is
before you ask, I just want to jump in and say, hey, thank you for saying that, because literally that is the thing that drives me to wanting to make games, is when people do make lifelong connections with people they've played games with. So thank you for calling that out. That means the world.
Yeah, of course. My question is, it's not really something that that I've been wanting to know for forever. Actually, it was asked in the Twitch chat I saw. I just wanted to get your take on the current state of EverQuest as it is, and sort of the direction that Daybreak has brought it in, since. I don't know if you've even been keeping track of it regularly, but I figure since it's sort of your baby, that you may have some opinions on it.
So I do apologize for not being an expert. I did, myself and two folks on the Rift team ended up playing when they did one of their, Fresh Start servers, like, I want to say maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and we, played the ultra hardcore Fresh Start and just loved the experience. It was slow. It was agonizing. It was a pain in the ass. It was lots of grinding. It was danger, and it was exhausting fun. And so, I can say that I enjoyed that experience. They didn't, they obviously didn't rewind everything because that's not technically possible. But they did, they entertained me, and I was happy to have given them money to do that. As for where it is today, sadly, I'm not, I'm unfortunately not that up to date. I do know the people that are in charge of the franchise. So Holly, who is the exec producer there, she got her first stint at SOE during the time I was on EverQuest, and I tremendously enjoyed working with her when she was one of our content designers. And I know that she has a lifelong love for the franchise. And so, I guarantee you that she's doing absolutely everything within her power. And then, same thing for, some of the other folks that are there. I'm not as close with, many of them, but I worked with a couple of them on EverQuest 1 and EverQuest 2. And again, great people. I have 100% faith in their abilities. It's a matter of what do they have the resources, meaning time and, human power to be able to accomplish. So that's how I would look at everything through that lens.
Scott, a listener's just raised, I always lie to people and say it's my last question and then I ask another one. I'm just an asshole like that. I'm sorry. But, listener Locke has just raised a great one in Twitch chat and he says, do you know anything about EverQuest Next and its eventual cancellation? He was really looking forward to that one, as I'm sure many people were. What do you know of that project?
Yeah, so I don't know I do know a little bit more than what's been going on, than what was shared publicly. But what was shared publicly is by and large the entire story. And when you say EverQuest Next, I assume this person means the one that got the project that got canceled, or something that's going from.
I believe they mean the one that got canceled.
Okay, yeah, so the one that got canceled, right, is it is very challenging, when you want to make a game that is fully, they had ideas of making the game heavily dependent on random generation and, voxel technology, construction, destruction, and so on. Building an MMO. Okay, so think about it this way. So they were going to build a thing called Landmark that would cause the tools to be built that would then be used to build the game. The problem with doing that is you now have to make your first problem to solve is how do we make making a game fun, which is a much harder problem than how do we make a game fun? Okay. How do we make the tools to make fun games fun? That is an unsolved problem. Nobody has successfully solved that. And so there were, my suspicion is that they got caught up in the many circular dependencies of, how do we make the act of game development fun because we need to make these tools that are fun and infinitely powerful. And nobody has invented that to this day. It's a very difficult problem.
Fair enough. Now, Scott, I won't take up too much more of your time. You've been absolutely amazing. I can't thank you enough for this. Let me give you an opportunity though. I'm not sure you've mentioned, obviously I won't make you spill the beans on what you're working on, but if you please feel free to plug anything you'd like, whether it be your Twitter or any of your prior games or anything, any interest you've got anywhere, what would you like to let people know about?
Yeah. Please feel free to follow me on Twitter. I'm at Hartsman, Hartsman. For my occasional wit and wisdom and commentary and venting about game development, and I try to keep it away from politics because I like keeping friends. And but I absolutely will mention, as soon as the excitement is mentionable, it will be mentioned there very likely first.
Is there a rough time frame where it can start to be mentionable? Should people be waiting months or years? What are we talking here? That's a really good question. So, the one thing that I've wanted more than anything else my entire career is actual time to spend on, time to spend on stuff without there being an impending deadline. Because, ever since, call it 1995, which is many, many, many years, I've largely been in a crunch of some sort or another. And so this is really the first time ever since then that I've actually been able to just take a breath and do things at a pace that I think is going to work well. Right. Not to overshare, but I didn't go on my first adult vacation until, the kind where you take off work to go someplace that isn't just visiting family. I didn't do that until I was in my 40s. And so, actually getting some time is something that I'm, planning on, spending wisely now instead of overspending it. Fair enough. Well, mate, if you ever take the next vacation to Australia, the beers are on me. So, love to. We'd love to have you here. Thank you so much, Scott. Now, I also want to throw a big thank you out to Gnoran, mate. Thanks so much. You've been fantastic as always.
Josh, thank you again for having me on. And Scott, again, it was a pleasure to meet you.
Scott, I'll say again for all the listeners, thank you for all the work you've done in the industry over the years. Obviously, your games have reached out and touched, a vast number of people. And so it's so exciting to hear that the fire has not burned out, that you're just as excited and passionate for your next project. And, we'll have to stay in touch. I'm dying to hear what it is. And please, by all means, the many, many, many listeners of Countdown would love to hear about it. You are absolutely invited back. If you've ever liked to share anything publicly, please just hit me up.
Right on. Well, thank you guys both very much. Good meeting you. And yeah, feel free to stay in touch.
Hi everyone, Josh here. I just want to take a quick moment to remind you that while Countdown to Classic will always be a podcast you can get for free, if you do happen to really enjoy the show and find yourself always coming back for more, then please do check out the show's Patreon page to see how you can help keep the lights on at Countdown to Classic, and even vote on show content as the show continues to bring you more and more classic WoW goodness. Alternatively, if monthly subscriptions aren't your thing, you can always visit the show's tip jar over at Ko-Fi, with that link being in the show notes and on the website too. Now, let's get back to the show. All right, it's time for another Countdown to Classic Kevin Jordan segment. Kevin Jordan, you are an absolute celebrity around here by now. How are you, mate? Good to have you back.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I got my Zoolander glasses on.
I can't wait to see the photos of that. That'll be great. Now, look, everyone, another reminder. Kevin has taken so much time out of his personal time for the show, to the point that, as we say in Australia, I've been taking the piss with his time. These calls have been going on, upwards of 45 minutes at times, and he has said nary a word of complaint. He has been an absolute angel. So how can you thank him? Well, you can go over to his Twitch channel at Kevin Jordan and throw him a follow, throw him a sub, jump in on one of his streams and just say hi, say, hey Kevin, heard you on Countdown, just wanted to say hello. That's how you can pay him back for all of this. It's very, very simple and easy to do. Just say hello to him. Kevin, you still streaming the 5 days per week?
Yeah, every day. Well, except for weekends, but yeah, every day, Monday through Friday.
Fantastic. All right, everyone. Well, let's get stuck into this one. It's time for a class that may be near and dear to my heart come classic time, and it's priest. And we've also enlisted the help of a priest expert, someone who has actually called into the show before, but that call hasn't been published yet. Far Q, how are you, mate?
Hey, Josh. Great to be here. So privileged to do this. Really looking forward to this call. I'm doing very well and looking forward to discussing the priest class in more detail.
All good, all good. All right, Kevin, let's get straight into it. You know the opening question by now. Talking priests, were you happy?
Yes, very happy. We took the priest in a different direction than was typical for RPGs. The typical priest was the cleric in a lot of previous games, tabletop games, RPGs. Heavy armor, primarily good, that kind of thing. And the game creates evil priests in the form of, enemies and things like that. But with ours, we decided to do cloth caster, more sinister, having both a good side and a dark side. And that worked really well, especially considering all the different cultures, the races represented, that were all vying for some sort of believability and different thematics within the priest class. So I think we pulled it off pretty well.
Okay, well, let's pick up on that sort of generic theme that you talked about, and you mentioned clerics in the past from other games, and listener Bevosabe asks this: how did the priest/cleric archetype from other MMOs influence the design of the WoW priest? So what can you think of specifically?
So definitely, healing, being a healer was one. Having a relationship with a faith or religion or God of some kind was also big. So whereas most other classes don't really get into their cultural background as much, it's more about what can you do. Clerics always had that additional layer to their personality, which is really, really cool and pronounced in other games. And then we also took specifically power word ideas from Dungeons and Dragons to make the, shadow word, power word ideas for the priest in World of Warcraft.
Okay, too easy. Now, FarQ, I'll throw over to you, mate. Do you have a generic question to get into with Kevin before we get sort of into the specific spec-related stuff?
Yeah, so I've heard you talk on a lot of different stuff in terms of your interfacing with different units, how you worked with the raid team, how you worked with the world team, the quest teams, and you've answered a lot of questions where you say, oh, that's up to that team. But I've never heard you talk about, at least on Countdown, you may have done it on your Twitch streams, how much interfacing did the raid team do with you, especially when you're thinking about redesigns and talent updates for possible future mechanics, and say, hey, we might have this mechanic in just to let you know? Or did you really look at the talent redesigns as independent of a mechanic? We want to make it really versatile. And I've got a specific example that I'll bring up when we get to the tree, but I kind of wanted your overall thoughts on how often did the raid teams talk to you, and how much did that influence or non-influence your design?
It did a lot more in the beginning. My approach was always make sure this is a really cool thing for as many different types of the game or parts of the game as possible, because, I knew that raiding was such a small percentage. It's so interesting how, and this has been especially true with the specialists that have appeared on the show, right, every week, how they're pretty much all raiders. They're pretty much all playing at the highest level, doing the hardest stuff, right? But that used to be a 2 to 5% thing, in the days of EQ and things like that. So World of Warcraft really brought raiding to the forefront for a lot of people, a lot more so than other games. But my approach was always the consideration that the raids would be 2 to 5%. And so I shouldn't necessarily try to be making a bunch of class content for that group specifically, because it was going to miss, 95% of the market. So having said that, I wanted dungeons and solo content to be really interactive with the classes. So, things like mind control, we talked about a lot as an example. They would come to us and we would sit down and we would talk about, well, how can mind control be cool in this dungeon? What abilities can they essentially use through mind controlling creatures in the dungeon to make the experience more interesting and fun? So we did a lot more of that at the beginning than later on, at least as far as I remember. Then it just became about how is, as the raiding game got more complex, unfortunately more of it came down to how is this going to break, how is damp and magic going to break this fight, or how is mind control going to break this fight, or how is a reflection ability going to break this fight? So there was less active or as preventative types of design collaborations.
Kevin, I've got one to piggyback off of that. Now, in terms of mind control, again, that same listener, I might be horribly mispronouncing their name, and I apologize. Bevo Sabi, maybe. What was the intention of mind control? Was it trolling? Were there PvP or PvE applications? Or was it just another theme-based ability? And I think you've explained that a little bit in your answer just there.
Yeah, it was definitely all of the above, honestly. We never set out to make a utopia. That's one of the things we talk about a lot. Whereas Modern WoW is closer to the utopia, they try to remove a lot of the social interactions that are bad. But unfortunately, that actually reduces the total overall social interactions. And I always considered good and bad social interactions to be really important to a game. So mind control is one of those things where it's this is going to lead to characters doing really fun things that sometimes annoy other people, but I think is worth it to add. And that's one of my favorite spells, just because it so delivered on the emergent gameplay that I knew that it would. But yeah, definitely thematic. He had a lot of mind control, mind affecting types of spells in his kit. And yeah, we wanted it to be used in PvP, in PvE, everywhere we could figure out a way to get it in there. So really fun.
Was it intended to work on bosses? Gantor is asking.
Almost never. Boss fights are typically varied, but an Onyxia type fight where it's essentially just one dragon that you're fighting, whelps notwithstanding, no, it wouldn't have been the kind of thing we intended it to be used. But like if it was a, 3-person fight or you fighting a council of like 5 guys, then those were more likely areas where we would allow mind control to work and could be super fun.
It actually might have been a relatively interesting cancel or knockback ability in terms of bosses, because maybe like a mind control gets thrown on someone like, Anixia, you say, and maybe it doesn't have the full effect of a mind control, but at least it, somewhat clouds the mind of the boss and they stop casting whatever spell they're casting or whatever.
There's super cool ideas. There are all kinds of ideas like that I'm sure the raid guys played with from time to time. Softer effects than the primary effect.
Yeah. Now, FarQ, I believe you were saying before the call started that obviously one of the big things you were keen to talk about was the priest racial abilities. I'll hand you over to for that one.
Yeah, Kevin. So it's, again, part of what, as you said, makes vanilla so wonderful is you have all these different scenarios and permutations and different ways of interacting with the world that aren't homogenous and aren't utopic. And one of them is the racial abilities. So if you could talk a little bit about the priest racial abilities, what you were thinking, and then how that came to be realized in the game and your reaction to it. And the obvious one is Fear Ward, but there's a lot of nuance in there about how you were constructing them, how they ended up getting used, and just generally your thoughts about them.
So generally speaking, abilities like that are really low bang for the buck, because you design an ability that is being used by one of 9 classes and then one of 8 races, right? And so it doesn't get a lot of coverage in terms of how much you put into it. That's the production argument that we always, brought up when we were talking about designing things. But early on, we had this ambitious idea, of course, when you feel like you have endless time to do things, that we would have racial abilities for lots of different classes, that there would be, the dwarf warrior could do this and the tauren warrior would be able to do this and that kind of thing. But, at the end of the day, once we realized how much less time we actually had to work on this game, not 20 years, we figured that it was super, or I held the idea that it was super important on the priest, whereas we could cut the other classes, in terms of racial abilities. And the reason it was so important on the priest was because it was trying to convey the culture of so many different races and their backgrounds and their connection to a type of religion or god that they might be, invested in. So, a troll priest and an undead priest is very different than a dwarf priest. So that was the main reason why I felt it was so important to do. And I also knew it was just going to be one of those things that I had to balance constantly, that I'd have to go back and forth on, and that people would base their decision, especially in PvP, on, those abilities in terms of what race they were going to play, which I considered to be cool, but also kind of unfortunate because, PvPers are always, min-maxers, or typically are min-maxers and have to win and want to win. So it puts a little too much pressure on that system, but I felt it was worth it in the end. So we kept going.
I'll jump in now, and to keep this one going, the meddling mage asks the following. How influential was Metzen in the shaping of the priest racial abilities? Did he have any say in it at all? Were they, any kind of brainchild of his, or was it you, Kevin? And did anyone on the team, you mentioned that you thought about doing racial class abilities with other classes and ultimately decided not to go in that direction, but did anyone else on the team really try to get those in the game?
To answer the second one first, yeah, quite a few of us were really excited about racial abilities on other classes, but again, everyone, I should say, except the producers. Producers were like, "No way, we don't have time for this." But anyone who was like in the design side of things, we were always coming up with cool things that we wanted to add to the game. In terms of the first question, he definitely had a huge hand in laying out, the cultural facets, or the quote unquote religious facets of the different races, and helping me understand, what was important about, those different races in terms of, the flavors and thematic to bring about. But no, he didn't really take part at all in the mechanical discussions on what kinds of buffs or anything like that.
Okay, no worries. Maybe I'll get the opportunity to ask him the question one day. Who knows? We reached out to him. We managed to find a contact, and we got word to Chris about the show, and formally invited him on. He politely declined, but that's okay. I'll still hold out hope for another day. We never know.
Right.
But now I'll throw back to you, FarQ. Just before we dive into the specs, have you got a more generic question for Kevin before we get specific?
Yeah, the one generic question I have regards the priests as levelers, because you made them very flexible in terms of having not just a holy damage sort of build, but you gave them shadow. Yet you made them probably more wand dependent than any of the other casters. And I was curious if that was intentional, if that was owing to their role primarily as a defensive and healer metric. And so to keep their mana going, they really needed wand DPS, especially early on, to kind of sustain what they were doing.
Some of that was, we expected a lot of classes to have a mix of wand, downtime, essentially from casting in order to preserve. And it might be that, it sounds like it certainly was true that, one class was going to have it worse than the others, just in terms of their mechanics. But no, I wouldn't say it was intentional that we wanted Priest to be like the Wand King, if you would. But in terms of like our game versus a lot of other games, downtimes in general were dramatically reduced. And so I can't say I was ever unhappy at the beginning about how often they were using their wands, because we were still just light years ahead of the downtime scenarios of a lot of other games. So it turned out to feel pretty good.
All right. So one last question, Kevin, before we get into the specs. I always do that. I lie horribly to you, but this one came in, from, I'll have to come back and remember this listener's name, but, we got, Fear Ward is somewhat notorious as one of the most ridiculously desirable racials in the game. Did you foresee how overpowered it would be when designing it? Why was it never nerfed in vanilla?
It's funny because Fear Ward did end up being one of the most desirable, but our fear was always classes that could do additional damage. A different means of damage were the ones that I was more concerned about. Obviously, CC breaking was really important for PvP, and it turns out that fear was a very common mechanic used in raiding for bosses, etc. But no, I didn't really worry, about Fear Ward being the absolute, most desirable one, to be honest. So that caught me by surprise a little bit. And it was never the intention. Again, like I tried to walk the line between desirable and cool and flavorful, but not, something that would force decision making when it came to making your character. So, but it was a tough line to walk. And so part of, to answer the question, why didn't we nerf it in vanilla, was part of it was us finding out. It took a while for it to really sink in how desirable Fear Ward was. And then the other was just like getting over that hump of, well, it's cool that there's a really desirable one. It's cool that there's a few desirable ones. And so now just figuring out how to make sure that the other classes have reasons, or other races have reasons to be desirable too.
And I do apologize. I found that listener's name. That was from Digital Love, who's got a couple more coming as well. But let's get into the specs now, and let's start with discipline. And so FarQ, think of a discipline question, but I've got one to kick off with while you think of one. And this comes from, show regular Def Camp, who we love like a brother here on the show. And he mentions this because, Kevin, you have talked about this on earlier episodes. And again, we come back to that desire to have a few more tanks in the game, or things that were pretty close to tanks. Now, you talked about how the discipline tree did have some initial plans to almost get there, and Def Camp asks, could you please ask Kevin about the tank discipline spec that we heard rumors of back in the day and what that was like?
It was never intended to be a tank spec. I should clarify.
Okay.
In retrospect, as people have asked me, in the last year or so, I've thought it was a cool idea, because I did say that I wish there had been probably one more tank and one more healer available to players. And so brainstorming ideas of where that would have come in, I thought the Discipline Priest was a pretty cool idea, especially considering, again, the cleric background, that like sort of transforming the Discipline Priest into more of a cleric and making him a tank, I thought would have been pretty cool. I mean, one of the reasons we had the priest be cloth wearer was to help balance out the gear situation between who was, rolling on the plate and mail and leather and cloth. So taking a cloth and making him a plate or one of the others would have complicated that mix, probably in a bad way. And so obviously, thinking back, it's a big decision to make the discipline priest, a tank or try to push him into tank. And I'm not saying you necessarily have to make him a mail wearer or plate wearer, but yeah, it was never intended that the discipline tree be a tank spec. That was just a retroactive thing. I was brainstorming with some people that we were chatting with.
All right, no worries. Fark, what have you got in relation to discipline?
So, Kevin, one of the things that I love so much about a priest is kind of how versatile they are and how well you blended the discipline and holy tree as a way to embody the lore of, I think they were called a holy fields medic in Warcraft 3. So then you've got discipline as this thing where they're mana regenerating, but they've also got some of this offensive with martyrdom and inner fire and mana burn, divine spirit, but mostly that's conducive to them. Then you had the 1.1 or 1.10 rework, and you gave them power infusion. And thank you for that, because it helped a lot of us get through MC and BWL much more quickly. Can you talk about that addition and the 31-point talent and why you replaced Divine Spirit, why you started adding this really offensive boost component to what was predominantly a healing?
Right. So we definitely found that one of the weaknesses of the talent tree and specialization systems in general is that if the cost to respec is too prohibitive, then when you're specialized at one thing, that's the only thing you can really apply yourself to effectively, right? So going back and forth between raiding and leveling or farming gold or whatever it is you're doing was really hard on some classes because you had to be a specialist healer to do your job effectively. But to do that and then, go out the next day and try to level or farm gold or whatever it was a giant pain. So we knew that if we had a lot of room to add DPS to healing specs essentially before they would run any risk of, pushing DPS classes out of the raid. So we started to bundle a lot more DPS into very desirable healing talents to make sure that they just got more DPS essentially for free. And then also it just fit, Power Infusion fit thematically in the sense that sort of whatever you're doing, you're better at it. And that was sort of the idea behind the discipline tree. There were a couple things going on in discipline. One is that it's kind of a support tree to the other two. So it was really, really good at supporting the very specific, I'm a holy healer versus I'm a shadow, killer. And then also discipline had the, focus on preventative damage with shield and things like that. So, and some of the buffs. So yeah, it ended up being a really good, capstone ability for the type of tree that it was. And because we had all that room to add DPS for free, that was a great place to do it.
It's an interesting tree, as you said, because it gives you that mana regeneration. It gives you a lot of place to play. I am curious if you thought the wand spec, specialization talent needed to be moved up after the 1.1 because they were dependent, or because you didn't feel those first two talents were that valuable?
There's probably, I don't remember specifically why I moved it up, but I imagine frequently reasons for moving things up were to make them more accessible, even if slightly more accessible, to other trees would have been one. So if we found that holy specs or even shadow specs were using their wands a lot, making that, low-hanging fruit so that those specs could take that was a good thing. And also, yeah, just general desirability between the types of talents offered in the first tier. Who is this talent for, essentially? And resisting stun, fear, and silence is far more of PvPer or PvP-minded talent, and one spec is more of a soloing, or PvE talent. So those complement each other very well in terms of that opening choice.
Let's move on to Holy now, and fuck you, I know you're going to have a lot of questions for this one. I'll open it off. I'll start off with this one, Kevin. Crackerman asks, now this is a bit more generic, but I think it ties into the Holy Tree pretty well. And he says, I'd love to ask Kevin about spell downranking. Was it a nerdy min-max thing or working as intended?
Both. Definitely a nerdy min-max thing. But it was something that was done a lot in previous games like EverQuest, and we liked the dynamic. So we included it in WoW. We thought it was a cool way of, a cool strategy or tactical element to how to perform effectively at various parts of the game. So, but once action bar space became so valuable, as the game expanded and items got more interesting with, clickable effects and things like that, it became kind of dated, right? So we had to sort of fold it out.
Okay. Fuck you. You're obviously someone who spent a lot of time healing. What have you got for Kevin with the Holy Tree?
Okay, Kevin, so this alluded to my earlier question about the interaction you had with the raid creators. And after the 1.10 talent revamp, we got Lightwell. And I guess part of what my question is twofold. One, can we either have our money back or like 5 more Lotheb fights? If 5 more fights that involve, you can't heal for a minute, so Lightwell works.
Right.
I know you had to get it, but it was one of those things where we got it and several of us spec'd into it, and our raid leaders said, "What are you doing?"
Right,
and we just didn't realize why 31-point talent wasn't so desirable.
Yeah, Lolwell. So Lightwell, I think there were times where it was really useful, or I should say it was very desirable. It was very powerful. One of the problems we were having with raids was how static a lot of them were. If you guys remember Molten Core, we were not going into the Guinness Book of World Records for the most creative mechanics fighting through Molten Core in a lot of cases. They were just your basic tank and spank type of things. And so one of the things we wanted out of the game was mobility, clicking on different things, interacting on different things, having people pay attention more to not just their action bar or the healing bar, the health bars of people, but interacting with the environment, paying attention to the environment, things like that. So the Lightwell definitely helped fit that idea perfectly. Like it mattered where you placed it. It mattered to you. It mattered to everyone that was going to use it. It was also a great way to sort of try to offload the burden of healing, the non-tanks in a way like, here's this thing you can go interact with and leave me to, the important thing of making sure the tank stays alive. So it fit that role as well. But yeah, the numbers on it and just the social issue of transforming the way people thought about how they healed and how they interacted with the environment was a big hurdle to get over. So we had to keep buffing it and buffing it and buffing it to the point where it's like overkill in terms of efficiency and power. And then also our interactable objects weren't as polished as I would have hoped. There were a lot of strange artifacts of like, how do you deal with a lot of people clicking on it all at once, or, how long it takes to fade out when that last charge is used, or, things like that afflicted a lot of our, interactable objects. So I loved what Lightwell was doing, and I stood behind it obviously for a very long time. But yeah, that was a learning process and a growing, process, and a communication process as well, trying to get people to use that thing and be happy with it. So yeah, it was a fun experience.
And it makes a lot of sense what you're saying about what's behind it and how to make it work in scale. And just the leveling experience and 2 people clicking on the same quest item at the same time, how that works, all of it makes a lot of sense. I think related, can you talk a little bit about Holy Nova and that our initial iteration was like a threat reducer that you could just spam, and if that had problems, and that was part of the reason you changed?
Yeah. Threat reduction was always a real scary element to add to things, just because it was essentially, in a lot of fights, it was essentially just a huge damage increase. You could take whatever percentage of threat you were modifying, and that was basically the threat or the damage percentage you were adding. And so if it applied to the whole raid, it was just like, yep, there's a % damage increase to the whole raid. And so And also just, again, one of those things that a lot of people just didn't understand. And so when you're playing the game and you're not a hardcore raider, or, really at the cutting edge of dungeon runs and things like that, you don't really understand why it's important or what's good about it. So it reads really poorly, to a lot of players, in the talent tree. So there's a couple reasons why we try to stay away from too many threat reducing type things, because of the scaling power problems and because of the readability or apparent desirability for a lot of those things. They also had no impact in PvP fights for the most part, and soloing, they didn't do anything. So there were whole swaths of the game where it just didn't matter. So those were tough mechanics to put in, even though they were very desirable for a very select group of people. And we also had, the final thing I'll say about threat is that threat actually mattered a great deal in vanilla. And it's one of those things it's a real tightrope walk to get right. And most games, I think nowadays, don't do a very good job of having threat be a real limiting factor. It seems like most games, it's like you do your threat thing, and as long as you're doing it reasonably competently, the boss you never lose threat, right? Which is not the intent of a threat system. The threat system should be kind of scary, like it should be this constant struggle between tank and DPS to make sure that they're both performing how they should be. Otherwise, bad things happen. So we didn't want to upset that balance by giving everyone these massive threat reduction tools and just making it super easy to maintain threat and do high damage and not ever have to care about it. So that was another reason we hesitated on things like threat reduction.
Thank you. Great answer.
All right. Before we move on to Shadow, anything to tie off on with Holy FAQ?
No, those are my big questions from Holy. It was, it's such an integral tree, and the way you reoriented things made them, priests so much more useful, and powerful in the single target healing. So, that's really what I wanted.
Kevin, I'd love to know, just before we move on from Holy, it's obviously what some people regard as, the great healing spec in the game. There's a number of different healers in the game, and we all respect that they have their strengths. But when we sort of stereotypically think of a healer, we do tend to think of a holy priest. Now, were you quite happy with this spec in particular? But also, did you spend, now I know when I say this, I know you spent a shitload of time with every spec because you designed them, but you said that you played your mage, you had your ret paladin. Now this is a healer. Did you gravitate towards the healing role much at all? And when you were testing it and designing it, were you kind of like, oh, fuck, I wish someone who cared more about healing was doing this? Do you know what I mean?
Oh, I do know what you mean. But no, I've always been so fascinated with game design that it just became its own set of challenges, really understanding, how healing works, what the pitfalls of healing systems are, how it interacts with everything else. It was just so fascinating to me that I liked all three of the roles in terms of a game design perspective. As a player, I was always more PvP inclined from previous games. And so I was looking for good mix of damage and other things. So I didn't gravitate towards healing classes as much, or support classes, I should say, depending on the game. But it's funny because I've been playing Final Fantasy XIV, and I found healing to be super fun. That game does it a little differently than WoW did traditionally. But yeah, it's funny how as I've gotten older, I've sort of changed my, identity in terms of what I gravitate towards. So, but yeah, in terms of design, I was fascinated by all the different specs, and the different types of people playing them and what they were trying to want, what they wanted from it and why they wanted to play that versus any of the other classes or specs and things like that. So I was always pretty fascinated with all of it.
Last one, just about Lightwell that you've obviously discussed, and you mentioned that you said, you went into bat for Lightwell back in the day, and it sounds like you still very much to this day still are in somewhat of support of it. But I think it's fair to say that it is one of the talents, or at least one of the major talents, that is kind of thrown under the bus these days. It does get a little bit of flack from the community. People sort of do the lol at it and what have you. But have you ever taken, I've sort of asked a question like this in the past, but did you take any of that personally back in the day, or even still to this day, about people kind of coming after one of the talents that you've designed? And did you ever find yourself, creating fake accounts on forums and defending it, going, Lightwell's really good, shut up, guys?
Right. No, I never really took it personally. I always had a really thick skin in terms of that. I also, like you say, like you recognized how much faith I have even now in some of the core reasons why Lightwell came into existence. So, to say that my heart or Lightwell's heart is in the right place, I still believe that, I still believe that the goals that it's trying to accomplish are worthwhile goals, essentially. And so that's why I speak about it like I do. And I also just love things that are different. I love things that accomplish goals without just being, the cut and paste of how other games have done it or how people want it. Sometimes people just want the most effective thing, the most efficient thing, or at least they say they do. And then they fall into a pretty boring, homogenous sort of effective, but, not really engaging play style. And it's things like Lightwell that break them out of that or shake them out of it. And you get to see some fun creativity. Well, how can we make this work? How can we break out of our mold and try to find it fun, having fun a different way? And that's when I think, game design really shines and people playing really get invested and interested in things. So yeah, I do believe in some of the goals and I also just like pushing people out of their comfort zone when it comes to mechanics to try new things and see if we can evolve, gameplay and things like that. So there I was with Lightwell.
Very good, very good. And I've got Blue Collar piping up in Twitch chat saying, people will complain about anything. Kevin, you're a legend at spell development. And I completely agree with that. So I just wanted to, yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to touch on that just because that is the one talent that I feel does get talked about a fair bit. When everyone's so happy with everything, that's one that I have noticed. But I'm so glad you touched on that. Thanks for that, Kevin. I hope you don't think I was having a go at you or anything.
No, not at all. Again, I don't take it personally. I understand that most people want to be successful and they want to feel powerful in the most straightforward way. And then once they feel that way, once they're established, it's like now we can experiment a little, but just make sure I can be super successful. And then we can talk about the bells and whistles, right? But as a game designer, I'm approaching it from a very different place, so.
Fair enough. Now let's move on to Shadow, guys. FarQ, you think of a Shadow question. I'll lead us off with this one. Kevin, this is from, again, Digital Love, who asks, Shadow Priests tend to occupy a similar space to Warlocks. Shadow damage, dots, fear, vampiric abilities, etc., etc. Was it difficult to keep the two discrete from one another when designing the spec?
Yes, we definitely wanted Warlocks to be the dot king, essentially. So that didn't necessarily mean you'd be the only class with dots, but really built around dots in the way that they interacted with the game and their enemies and things like that. So, but we wanted Priest to have mechanics that, in his general kit, he could do to add damage without taking up too much of his time when he was healing. So that was, Dot was perfect in that sense mechanically for healing specs to kind of keep doing their thing, even though that wasn't allowed because of the mana cost. But in a perfect world, you could throw a dot and then heal your friends and still feel like you were getting in there a little bit. And then Mindflay was a great way of making, the Shadow Priest just say, I'm not healing. This is all about damage, right? I'm all about throwing dots and then I go straight damage. And so, yeah, not quite the Dot King, plays a little different, but that we had to be wary of stepping on the toes of between the two classes quite a bit.
Okay, FarQ, what have you got for Kevin in relation to Shadow?
So I think, you touched on this, and this is something that Josh in particular is wrestling with. It's like, I want to damage, but I want to have some of this flexibility of being able to heal in raids. Mm-hmm. And one of the discussions that came up on the Discord channel for Countdown was do you really see Priest as a hybrid class? And is Shadow the tax that they pay for being hybrid? Because obviously you've got things like you've already talked about the Reddit and how you wish you could have made that stronger and they could have been a really strong damage class. With the Shadow Priests and what they're able to do in terms of raid, in terms of max DPS, like you said, at the end of the day, you level 27 specs to be able to be invited to raids. Mm-hmm. But the reality became for most skills that wanted to progress, shut up and heal for a lot of them. So what are your thoughts if it is do you consider it a hybrid class? And if so, is there lower DPS attacks that they have to pay independent of a pet, in comparison to the Warlocks?
No, I don't consider them a hybrid class. I definitely consider them to be, primary role. The only class I actually consider to be a hybrid, because my definition is a little different than others, was the Druid. But the priest, like I'm a Shadow Priest and I run in and I'm doing my thing. The only time I would expect him to ever really heal is in an emergency situation where he had to basically just shut off, like shadow form and just, basically transform into something else and then throw a few heals to try to save the day. But that wasn't his purpose. And assuming everything was sort of going smoothly or as expected, he would never really do that. So, and that's what I see, like the difference between, a hybrid class and, any other class is you pretty much are responsible for your role and your role alone. And that's all you're judged on. So the Druid was the only one that was originally intended to try to be mixing and matching and doing a lot of different things, at the same time in the same pull, even though eventually he stopped doing that as well. So never intended to be a hybrid class by that definition.
It's something that will ruffle a few feathers, I'm sure, Kevin, because I know I've been involved in a few back and forths on that one. But as you say, it completely comes down to your interpretation, your definition of that term hybrid.
Right.
Now, I won't get into it, but it's just, it's silly little semantic arguments that we have fun with over the minutiae of the game. So it's interesting to hear your take.
I just thought of a new, classic guild name that would be perfect. Classic or casual hybrids. I think it would be perfect.
Exactly. Now, Kevin, I'll cut back to this one again from a final question from Digital Love, who says, was the intent always to have Shadow Priests from the get-go, or was it a spec that was necessitated later on by the difficulty of leveling a pure healing class? Did you intend for it to be an endgame raid spec or something more along the lines of a beefed up shaman tank, viable for leveling but not competitive endgame?
No, we intended to have Shadow. Shadow was always intended. That was part of his kit, that he be this representative of the light or the holy side of things, but also be kind of sinister, underneath, like you weren't really sure. So that's why he had a lot of mind control and tricky stuff in his kit. That was always going to be part of his thematic. And, as I've said before, the intention was always that, all 27 specs be welcome and viable and optimal in all walks of the game, all areas of the game. Reality is you never come close to that, but that was always the intent. So we never designed a spec to be just for PvP or just for leveling or just for raiding or anything like that. We always pushed towards making it, everything usable and desirable everywhere. So. All
right. Farq, have you got another one on Shadow?
Yeah, on Shadow, I think one of the things that's challenging about it is that for some of the spells on the early levels, you kind of want to wait until you can get that shadow form and then just go in the whole tree, because they don't quite work the same way that discipline and meditation have for leveling. But one of the things you did change in 110 was, shadow weaving up, which made holy weaving a much more viable alternative in raids. And I was curious, because that's now, it's not quite a meme spec, but it's something that a lot of people will at least try if they're not min-maxing, and they'll stick them in a group of 4 warlocks and say your primary role is to heal, but make sure you have your dot up at the lowest rank so that you have that shadow weaving at full. Was that move up an intention to get that spec into raids or into end game a little bit more?
It was definitely to create more synergies between Holy and Shadow. But again, like I rarely design things so that, one part of the game would be like transformed by this change. So that sounds, I can't remember specifically, but it sounds more like just something emergent as people have theory crafted different ways of optimizing the specs. But, cause again, frequently popping in and out of shadow form isn't necessarily something I don't think I would have designed towards.
All right. Now, Norfair asked this question, just as we tie off on Shadow, and Kevin, we're very near the end now. Were Shadow Priests, being as ridiculously durable as they ended up being intended? Was that intended? Between Inner Fire, Shadow Form, and Power Word Shield, they were damn near tank level of durability, speaking from the PvP perspective mainly. So was that intended?
It did go overboard at certain stages of the game. There was a certain place where Discipline Priests were also ridiculously tanky. So we had our moments, where things got a little bit out of control. Yeah, the question is, it's tough to answer at face value, just because there probably were moments where they were as tanky as they were intended. Probably were moments where they weren't. So, and, depending on which specific moment you're talking about, I'm not sure. But generally speaking, we wanted Shadow Priests to be more durable. So we did intend them to be durable, but they should have never been actually tank durability, right? Like for them to be tanking raid bosses or even dungeon bosses, assuming you were appropriately geared for that dungeon. That shouldn't have been a thing.
Okay, last one on Shadow, and this is from me. Now, people do know that the Shadow Priest DPS in endgame isn't necessarily anything that's too crash hot. It's very much so middle of the road, it's fair to say. People know that I'm thinking of maybe being my guild's one Shadow Priest, and, people can roll their eyes and lol at the host of the show, obviously taking maybe what would some consider perhaps a little bit of a meme spec. But I'd ask you, Kevin, the DPS that they could output at the end of the day, was that something that you guys feel you sort of were left wanting on? Was it a little bit of a letdown? Would you go back and change anything with that, or working as intended considering all the other things the priest can do?
No, I was pretty happy with it. I mean, face melting became a real thing in terms of Shadow Priests and what they were doing, and I thought that was great because, again, it turned the concept of the priest on its head. Like when you think about a priest or a cleric, you immediately go to, well, how well can he heal? So I was really pleased that we created an aspect of the priest that was very high damage in a surprising way, and was super effective in depending on the area of the game you were playing in. So I was pretty pleased with it.
All right. And you did a great job. Leveling with the Shadow Priest was so much fun, Kevin. It was outstanding.
If only their mana pools could be managed a little bit better. They're known as the bots as well a little bit.
Right.
Now let's move. Let's sort of finish up here. Farq, you think of your one final question. I'm going to put my regular questions to Kevin as we're now on the home stretch. Kevin, anything that you know of that hit the cutting room floor?
One thing I remembered was floating. Like we originally had this idea that all priests wouldn't walk; they would float around the world everywhere they went.
Wow.
Sort of like, we're above you, very haughty and pretentious. And it also played well into their sort of mind games, where they would just be this like, they would just, float around like they were just had powers you didn't have, But at the end of the day, like there were so many great animations that the priest would have missed out on in terms of running around and jumping and interacting with the world, that we decided to scrap the idea. So. But we love that idea of sort of, to call from Street Fighter, that M. Bison look of arms folded, and as he just kind of floats around, staring at everyone evilly.
Definitely would have been interesting that maybe you guys scrapped the talent tree of pretension as well.
Right.
Would have been great.
Pretentiousness.
Yeah. All right. And also, Kevin, if you could go back in time and change anything with the priests, what would you change?
What would I change about priests? Aren't they perfect? I mean, Lightwell would have come with a version of me in every box, so I could jump out of the box and say, "This is why Lightwell is awesome, and here's how to use it." And
let me show you how. Yeah.
All right.
All right, excellent. Fuck you. Your final question for Kevin before we let him go.
Yeah, so I think you kind of hit it on the head with your last comment, Kevin. I always thought priests were a very balanced class, good for sustained leveling, and they were so versatile. And you've said several times in these recordings that you love all your children equally, but it is pretty clear that you love priests a bit more equally than others. So, what would you say to the other healers that just can't compete with the flexibility, the versatility, and that the strengths of priests in vanilla, especially after the talent revision? What would you let them know to kind of make them feel a bit better about the class they were playing?
Don't believe the propaganda. That's what I would tell them.
It's all propaganda. Where every healer has their positives.
And if you do believe the propaganda, roll dwarf. I don't,
Fair enough. All right, guys. Look, let's call it quits there. Kevin, thank you so much again. It's always a pleasure. And we're so close to the end now. Just that one class left.
Did we save the best for last?
Well, some of the rogues will definitely be saying so. And fuck you. Thank you so much for joining us, mate. I really appreciate it.
No, my pleasure. And just make sure you reverse the order of the broadcast and sharing these, so Rogue will go before Priest, and nice, Kevin will still be correct.
That's right.
Very good. All right, guys. I'll see you later.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
And that's the show for today, everyone. But be sure to tune in next week as we have even more calls for you. So tune in then for more Countdown. Before we go, though, let's go through the patrons. Aero PC, Ante, Binger, Brandon K, Callum F, Chunky Dunk, Connor C, Damien A, Dave K, David F, DJ M, Herbert, James S, Jamie S, John HC, Josh W, Minoru, Randall H, Rasmus S, Rarebit, Rick S, Ryan K, Schmige, Sylvia K, Tim B, Tim S, Torbjorn C, Voikora, and Zudamos. A big thank you, as always, to all of you, and of course the very dedicated patrons of Countdown to Classic. An extra special shout out and thank you from the bottom of my heart to Alice R, Billy C, Daniel K, Eddie S, Eric S, Firespittin' Kitten, Flozy B, Ida B, Batlord, Carl W, Nick B, Palfurus, Tsunami, The Anton, Wilson Ma, and Valaco. Thank you so much for your phenomenal support of the show. Countdown to Classic, as you know, would not be the same without your support. So that's it for today, everyone. Have a great rest of the week. I'll see you all next time.